The Elemental Wizard of Hogwarts Chapter 121-140. Chapter 121 _ the beginning of the journey. Seal didn't know much about the suffering of his other mentor, but Seal knew that his hard days were coming to an end. Since the night he returned to London, Shire's hard days had begun. Seal was also a little fortunate that he and Hermione were still laughing at their age, and the Grangers were still very reliable. That night, Seal successfully slept in a separate room. If Seal and Hermione were older, maybe the Grangers and his wife, who were two CPs, would make a scene without a room and forcefully gain an uncle. Thinking of this, Charles was both embarrassed and a little looking forward to it. Of course, this was just a bland start. In the next week, Seal was pulled by 3 women and began to buy food, skincare products, and clothes. The 3 women showed great enthusiasm for this. Enthusiasm. Every time Seal was full of bags, he walked back unwillingly. Of course, the most outrageous thing was my mother. Until a few days before the trip, my mother mysteriously pulled Charles and told him to put a stick-shaped object wrapped in a bath towel. Charles looked at the shape and simply weighed it with his hands. Good guy, his mother didn't know where he came up with a Far Eastern specialty AK-47. Charles looked at his sturdy mother with a face worthy of yours, but he received an iron fist of love from his mother. Just said a simple sentence for self-defense, and supervised Seal to put it away. That is to say, Shire's small box is very magical. Not to mention his mother's Far Eastern specialties, the clothes and things that the 3 women bought this week, they could never fit without driving a truck. Under the supervision of his mother, after Shire honestly put the specialties in the box that was specially made for her family, and under the coercion and inducement of her mother, she vowed not to touch the specialties, and Mrs. William was happy. Go busy with other things. The day of departure will come soon. The 2 families went into battle lightly, and basically everything was stuffed into Seal's suitcase. Everyone was ready to go, only Seal was sadly carrying his small suitcase and stood behind him. Background. After a short while, a large RV came to Shire's house. After honking the horn twice, the 2 families walked up excitedly. Only Shire stared blankly at all this. The black question mark on Shire's face looked at the RV in front of him. Shall we drive? Otherwise. Hermione looked smugly at Seal. We've decided to go by car. Road trip, it's great, isn't it? Why hasn't anyone told you? If it wasn't for the smugness on Hermione's face, Seal would really believe Hermione's words. My dear, this little girl is obviously uniting everyone in revenge for not telling her about her trip. But Seal didn't care either. After rubbing the head of Xiaomao Dumpling, after making the already a little frizzy dumpling even more frizzy, Shire also went into the RV with a happy face. It was not until this time that Seal understood why he had to buy so much food. His feelings were waiting here. But one thing to say, although I didn't go by plane as Seal originally thought, Seal, who was on a road trip or something, was also very happy. After all, the road trip was the first time in 2CL's life, so it was normal to be a little excited. The RV is very big, and with the small box of Seal, it is enough for the 2 families to move around. After a simple negotiation, Seal temporarily lost the ownership of the small box. The reason is very simple. The girls decided to live in a more comfortable box. Seal didn't have any objections either. After cleaning up, the 2 families started their journey. Of course, it's not just Shire and Hermione who are happy. The Ron family is also lucky enough to win the Daily Prophet's grand prize. The family originally wanted to save the money, but the editor-in-chief of the Daily Prophet kept harassing them. Under the circumstances, the family decided to use the money to go on a trip. The destination was Egypt. It happened that Ron's brother Bill was working as a spellbreaker for Gringotts in Egypt. To put it bluntly, he was an employee of Gringotts and a player who created wealth for Gringotts. After the family contacted Bill by international letter and explained the situation, Bill excitedly wrote back and told the family that they warmly welcome the family to come and play here, and that he will take a leave of absence to act as a tour guide and let everyone to go out to play. So just like that, the Weasleys also started their own family's exotic tour. The only difference may be that the Shire was experiencing the joy of Muggles, while the Weasleys were going to experience the magnificence of magic. Of course, many things are not absolute. Some people are happy and some people are sad, such as Harry, who is holding 2 letters and eating lemons constantly. Looking at Hermione and Shire's letters, as well as Ron's letter, Harry knew that his hard days were coming. At least this summer vacation, he would no longer be able to write letters asking his friends to give him a wave of support. And his unfortunate uncle somehow knew that he couldn't use magic in the summer vacation. This time, his cousin Dudley, who was afraid that he was afraid of death, began to dominate the house again. Of course, Harry was the object of his cousin Dud's intimidation. In fact, if he had to say it, Harry was still very happy. At least he moved out of the small and dark stairwell to have his own room. Of course, this is one of the few happy Harrys. With what I have read, I wish you all a happy play. Don't worry about my central thought. I responded hastily to Shire and Hermione, and I can feel the happiness in my heart after Ron, who is bubbling with snot. Harry looked at the empty bedroom, rubbed his empty stomach and sighed. He could only hope that the 3 of them would come back sooner. Both families had completely different summers, only Harry was beating. Of course, none of these things had anything to do with Grindelwald now. After tossing and turning, he came to Grindelwald, Finland, and after taking the pseudonym of Gold Russell, used magic to confuse a Muggle. At this time, Grindelwald was obediently queuing up to check the tickets, preparing to get on the plane and fly to the destination France in a Muggle way. This trick was told to him by Dumbledore's old bee. Thinking that today's magic world can be so loose, not even monitoring the way Muggles travel, Grindelwald couldn't help sneering. When did the wizards feel arrogant enough to think they were superior? Although he was constantly complaining in his head, he still looked kind on the surface. Under the smiling service of the stewardess, he sat quietly in his seat. I really want to know what that stinky boy will look like when he sees him. Grindelwald began to miss the days with Seal. But what he didn't know was that Shire, who originally thought he would arrive before him, was still eating barbecue meat and singing songs on the British road, and he was walking slowly and leisurely. Chapter 122-Grindelwald people are on the road. As we all know, the special product of France is the strike. Unfortunately, when Grindelwald got off the plane ahead of schedule, he encountered the special product of France. Because of the general strike, the luggage at the airport was not carried. Fortunately, Grindelwald didn't have much luggage, but when he left the airport, he thought of apparating to the reserved hotel to stay, but this crowd of people was obviously not a wise move. Looking at the empty streets and the companions who were talking on the phone and accompanied by various national scoldings from various countries, Grindelwald felt for the first time in his more than 100 years of career what it means to be tired. I ignored it. There were more and more passengers around because there was no one to pick up the plane. Grindelwald neatly arranged his clothes and prepared to walk to find a place with no one to change his shape. Not to mention going directly to the hotel, at least he could get away from Paris. Closer to the city. But what Grindelwald never expected was that human beings have a behavior called herd mentality. At first, there may be only a few people. Seeing that the handsome Grindelwald was walking towards Paris alone, he went up. Slowly the crowd got bigger and bigger. When Grindelwald felt something was wrong, there were already a huge crowd behind him, and even slogans were shouted. The general meaning was that the airport needs services and we need vehicles. Grindelwald, the elegant man who had been the first to walk to Paris, was immediately elected leader of the protest march. And despite Grindelwald's desperate explanations, the angry crowd could no longer control it. So, out of desperation, Grindelwald had to carry the mighty parade army to move on. The plot needs, just when the airport is not far from the room. What made Grindelwald even more speechless was that after walking for almost an hour, he finally saw the general appearance of Paris, and 2 waves of parades gathered. On the one hand, there are public transport drivers who demand high salaries and basic welfare increases, and on the other hand, there are pedestrians who need public transport. The 2 gangs looked at each other, and their anger was extremely embarrassing for a while. And Grindelwald, who was pushed out to be the principal, was even more embarrassed. He didn't know what to do. If it wasn't for his current appearance, he would have apparated away according to Grindelwald's temper. Also put a gas stove on the 2 waves of people. The elected Grindelwald neatly tidied up his clothes, and then made up his mind, and delivered a moving speech. Anyway, to sum up, all this is someone else's fault, and it has nothing to do with us users. Money relationship. Then, while everyone was still cheering and discussing eagerly, he seized the opportunity and slipped into a deserted alley in an instant, and immediately apparated and disappeared. As for the speech just now, everyone's parade. Oh, anyway, what Grindelwald said just now, he didn't believe a word, and if he insisted on saying it, he could only say that the speech skills he had developed in those years did not disappear because of time. The old wizard, who managed to get out of the crowd, lowered the brim of his hat and walked faster towards the hotel he had booked. Because of the inexplicable parade, Grindelwald inexplicably became the leader again. This identity is no longer available, and he needs to find a new identity as soon as possible. I don't know what this unfortunate person thinks about being the spiritual leader of the French parade in Finland. Of course, all of this has nothing to do with Charles, who is enjoying seawater, sand, and ice drinks on the long sandy beaches of France. Looking at the chaos in Paris in the newspapers, at this moment, Charles is extremely grateful that the 2 adults decided to drive by themselves. At least, if nothing else, Charles, who is afraid of trouble, absolutely does not want to step into Paris at this moment. But life is often not so smooth. According to Murphy's Law, the more afraid of something, the more it will come. These 2 owls flew over towards Seal in a twisted manner. One is Ron's remote letter, which is nothing more than showing off his new wand, what he has seen and heard in Egypt, and of course the family photo that is about to be published in the newspaper. In the photo, Ron is holding a happy face. Own mouse. The other letter was rather strange, without a signature, but looking at this familiar flower font, Seal knew at once that it was written by Lao Dang. The letter simply explained that he had helped Shire and Hermione apply for a 1-month temporary wand use in France, and that France was a bit unsafe at the moment, and he wanted to rush to Mr. Newt's residence as soon as possible. As soon as Seal read the letter was accompanied by flames, and all of it burned at once. Charles didn't even react, until Hermione in a swimsuit came over. What's wrong? Seal, I saw a fire here in the sea. Seal looked at Hermione in the limited edition swimsuit, took a sip of the juice from the glass, and made it from the reclining chair. Nothing, a letter from the teacher urging me to go to Mr. Newt's place. It seems that there is something wrong. He applied for us a 1-month temporary wand use right in France. The other is Ron's show-off letter. Know what? Hermione, however, immediately grabbed the bright spot in Ciel's words. Wait, Ciel, does that mean we can use wands freely now? Ciel couldn't help but stood up and tapped Hermione's hairball on the head. What are you thinking? It won't take effect until you see Mr. Newt. For now, forget about magic and enjoy your vacation. After speaking, without waiting for Hermione to react, she left a sentence to discuss the next itinerary with her parents, and then slipped away. Hermione stomped on the spot alone with some grievances, and whispered a word of wood. At this time, in Paris, France, in a century-old street-side apartment building, Newt Scamander was looking at the letter in his hand with a frown. Mrs. Scamander brought a cup of coffee and gently placed it on Newt Scamander. Next to Tay. What's the matter, dear? I haven't seen you like this for a long time. Newt gave a stiff smile, saw his wife's face, and then lowered his head shyly and said slowly, It's nothing. A group of criminals who smuggled magical animals attacked my checked box, causing many magical animals to be smuggled. Run out and now the muggles are marching outside and I suspect some people are trying to take advantage of the chaos. Seeing Newt's appearance and Newt's words, Mrs. Scamander laughed suddenly. Ha ha, Mr. Scamander, it's been almost 50 years, and you're still the same. After speaking, the two looked at each other and couldn't help laughing together. Chapter 123 _ Grindelwald, the godfather of the gang. When Charles finished telling the adults what was in Dumbledore's letter, both parents showed great interest in visiting a long-established wizard. Even grabbed Hermione to study the old gentleman's hobbies and books for a while, hoping to send some gifts. After all, strictly speaking, this was the third time that the parents of both parties were about to witness the magic of magic. Yes, you read that right, for the third time, whether it's Shire's parents or Hermione's parents. The activities that the two families often hold during the summer vacation are crazy about the existence of Muggle protection laws. The reason is very simple: they have never seen their children use magic, even once. At most they listen to Shire and Hermione discussing magic terms they didn't understand. This kind of child obviously doesn't know anything about what he says, and he still thinks it's amazing, but he can't show it. As a parent, he obviously doesn't understand anything. But the pain of having to pretend to understand the children's summer homework is simply unbearable. Live for outsiders. Of course, what is even more terrifying is the men's alliance formed by Shire, Mr. William, and Mr. Granger. For some reason, Mr. William and Mr. Granger are very interested in the existence of potions. When traveling, he asked Seal all about potions all the time. If it wasn't for Seal's inheritance of Slytherin's vast knowledge, some questions would not necessarily be answered by Seal. Of course, occasionally the two Muggle fathers would take advantage of everyone's sleep, and secretly take Seal or Hermione's potions books to the outside of the car and follow the prescriptions. But the results were all sticky and dark, disgusting things without exception. The two of them also felt helpless about this. Obviously, according to Mr. Granger, they had seen the deployment of their daughters, but the two of them were dead and alive. Can't copy. Neither of them said anything about these things, and they were very tacitly prepared to continue their silent research, at most pulling Seal into the water. To be honest, Mr. Granger has been greedy for raw bone water that can be used for tooth replacement for a day or two. Not to mention Shire's father, Mr. William, who is a surgeon. He was really jealous of Bai Xian potion. If it weren't for the strong mothers of the two families, who usually watched the children when they were not at home, the brothers at this time might have done something secretly. After receiving the support of the two adults and deciding to leave early tomorrow morning, Seal also relaxed a lot, and even began to look forward to his pet. As for the surprise that Dumbledore said, "Oh, how can there be Hermione in a swimsuit in that thing? Go wherever you love." Thinking of this, Seal also happily rushed to the beach. How could you not let go of this beautiful scenery and play? To say that people are going to be unlucky, it really means drinking cold water and stuffing their teeth. Grindelwald just found a random person in a Muggle hotel and changed his identity and appearance. As soon as he walked out of the door of the hotel, he was sandwiched by two black suits. Just as Grindelwald was thinking that the visitor was not ready to force a breakthrough, a luxurious car stopped in front of Grindelwald, before Grindelwald could wait for him. Woe reacted, and a black suit had opened the door and respectfully signaled to Grindelwald to come in. Grindelwald is also a daring artist. As the first-generation Dark Lord, he has never seen a battle. He sat in the car very elegantly. Today, he wanted to see what kind of battle it was. Can you be recognized as soon as you leave the hotel? Just when Grindelwald seemed to be sitting elegantly and relaxed in the back row, he was actually watching the surroundings like a leopard. Driver said, "Boss, we went against the Godfather's order to intercept that shipment. There was a problem, and many brothers died." Before Grindelwald could speak, an anxious voice came from the co-pilot, "Where's the goods? How's the goods?" Hearing what seemed to be the second-in-command's question, the driver hesitated and replied, "According to the information sent back from the scene, a lot of monsters appeared in an inexplicable suitcase, and they didn't look like any known creatures at all. I think the scene may be hilarious, and many people believe such outrageous rumors." Quote. When Grindelwald heard this, he almost understood it. After a long time, he was still ahead. As for the visual sense of monster plus suitcase, why does it feel like a touch in some of his not very good memories? Grindelwald's head bowed and thought hard, but the two horses in the front row were terrified. The man in the co-pilot gritted his teeth and immediately said to the driver, I don't care if it's a monster or not, I'll go and catch it right away. A gun can't be used with a knife, and a bomb can't be used with a gun. These things are related to whether the boss can gain great power. Hearing this, Grindelwald immediately clarified his thoughts. It was very simple. Someone must have asked this unlucky bastard to do something and promised him the power of a wizard. The real situation is often one-shot one. Forgetting all is empty, and the unconscionable is even a direct life-suppressing spell, but every year, there are some fools who are eager for power and jump into this whole set regardless of their health. Grindelwald didn't speak, he simply waved his hand and started driving. It seems that Paris is not so peaceful. There are always some people who want to sneak up on a little trick. It seems that his identity is still very interesting. Let's keep it for now. Thinking of this, Grindelwald smiled slightly, and silently reminded himself in his heart that he should not forget to write a letter to Dumbledore and ask him to come and tidy up his tail. After all, the unlucky bastard who borrowed his identity is still lying naked in the house. For convenience, it is best to ask the old bee to sweep his tail. Thinking of the inexplicable dragging the old bee into the water, the corners of his mouth began to rise unconsciously. The two people sitting in the front row seemed to be laughing when they saw their boss, and felt inexplicably happy. This ended the state of walking on thin ice. The person in the passenger seat cleared his throat, took out a photo from his arms, turned around and handed it to Grindelwald. Big brother, this is a task arranged by the Godfather. The Godfather of the few people in the photo has offered a reward of 10 million. Do we want it? At this time, Grindelwald's eyes were rounded in his heart when he looked at the photo. In the photo, the official Shire family looked like he was still smiling heartlessly. He calmly dealt with his subordinates. Wait, now the main thing is to find the box. As for this child, help me pay attention to the news, I want to know everything. Yes, the two people in front of two responded immediately. Grindelwald also stopped talking. Watching the scenery outside the window kept regressing. Grindelwald felt as if he really wanted to write a letter to Dumbledore, and ask the old bee to come to Paris. This situation is obvious, it's not my kind of situation that is purely for disgusting old bees. Chapter 124-Magic is 007. At this time, Seal doesn't know that he has been blacklisted by a certain Muggle faction, but even if he knows about Seal, he probably doesn't know what is going on. It stands to reason that Seal is just a primary school student who can do magic. What can he do? Of course, Dumbledore, who received the letter, didn't think much of it. Old Deng's first reaction was that the purebloods of the Mother had already begun to reach out to the Muggle underworld forces. He rubbed his temples with a headache, then wrote a letter back to his old friend, then wrote another letter to Fox, got rid of it and brought it to Newt, then frowned and walked outside the principal's room, ready to start beating check out these purebloods. And what was he doing as a Seal who knew nothing in this chaos? Of course, he was lying on the big bed of the RV, drinking Coke, eating snacks, and playing the red and white machine with Hermione. Seal, who manipulated the red and blue villains in the game to kill the quartet, received waves of admiration from Hermione, an ignorant little girl, but Seal always felt that the phrase, "little bully's endless fun," was missing a lot of meaning. And one more thing, as someone who used to play 99 in 1, now seeing that there is only one game in a cassette, and selling it for the price of I-5 given to him in the previous life, Shaw felt that the operation of Lauren really made money. Amidst Hermione's admiration, Seal reluctantly dropped the handle and ran to the front of the car to see where he was going. As for the reason, it's very simple. Clear the level. As a big host in the previous life, Contra of Seal can only say there is no pressure. How do you say that sentence? The black soul does not go out, and Seal is invincible in the world. As soon as the blood relationship comes out, Seal kneels down and begs for mercy. After learning that it was coming soon, Seal turned to look at the little girl who was still competing with the game, and a smug smile appeared on his face. Aaron played the role of Hermione and could only call 666 next to him. It didn't take long for the RV to drive into a countryside outside of Paris. The large green space and the beautiful scenery made Charles couldn't help but keep admiring Mr. Newt's ability to choose a place. Mr. William, who had been driving in the countryside for a while, stopped the car in confusion, looked at the address given by Charles, looked at the map in confusion, and finally couldn't help but scream. "Damn, I can't find it here. It's not on the map at all." Hearing Mr. William's words, Mr. Granger quickly leaned over, and Charles looked at the two big men speechlessly, and even took out a compass to study. The helpless Seal was looking at it, and if he didn't go up to stop it, it was estimated that the two of them were even planning to come to a field survey. After all, Seal's little box really had everything in it. A very skilled father. Charles stepped forward to interrupt the argument between the two, took the address slip given by Dumbledore, glanced at the address on it, then compared the map, and said confidently to Mr. William, who was driving, "Listen to me." The two men looked at the confident Seal, a little funny, and Mr. Granger directly laughed at Seal for not knowing how to read a map or something. That Seal was polite and replied directly that he couldn't understand such a professional map of the two, but the two of them might not understand their own magic. This time, the two fathers shut their mouths and listened to Seal's directions honestly, thinking about it. What kind of arguing between the scientific side and the mysterious side of Seal, not to mention that Seal is still on weekends. Under the command of Seal, the two families quickly came to a green space with an absolutely amazing view, but unfortunately, in the eyes of everyone, this is just an open space. Just as Mr. William was about to sneer at his ignorant son, Charles immediately held the note in front of Mr. William, looked carefully, keep it in your heart, and read it a few times. Hearing Seal's words, Mr. William was a little puzzled, but he couldn't help but follow the steps that Seal said, and then Mr. William saw a scene that made his three views collapse. After Mr. William completed the operation according to Shire's steps, the open space in front of Mr. William's eyes began to change drastically. The originally picturesque ground began to shake continuously, as if the hard ground suddenly turned into water. Then amid the fluctuations, a strange-looking house slowly began to rise from the ground, just like the secret base of 007 in the movie. This. The miraculous sight made Mr. William not knowing what to say for a while, so he could only stammer and dance about something to say to Charles. Seeing Mr. William's appearance, Charles helplessly shrugged his shoulders. "It's all said, you don't understand magic." Then he opened the door naturally and got out of the car. Everyone in the back of the car was full of curiosity when they saw that Mr. William hadn't recovered so far. One by one, they grabbed the notes and began to operate according to Charles's method. After a while, the words WTF and OMG echoed through the car. Inside. On the contrary, Hermione was much calmer. Although she was surprised, Hermione knew that this thing was the legendary faithful charm. Seeing the four adults in the car were constantly admiring the magic of magic, Hermione felt that she was still following in the footsteps of Seal. After all, strictly speaking, only Seal is the only existence here. As soon as Hermione got out of the car, Seal knocked on the door of the house in the open space, but it was strange that after waiting for a long time, Seal didn't hear back. He gently turned the door handle, and the door suddenly opened a crack. This familiar sense of sight made Seal nervous all of a sudden. He immediately raised his hand to indicate that everyone was in a situation, and then immediately took out the wand he carried with him and prepared to fight. Seeing Seal's appearance, everyone immediately became nervous, and Hermione followed Seal's example and immediately drew out her wand to be ready to deal with emergencies. Of course, both children were like this, not to mention a few adults. Mrs. William immediately ran to the box and took out her AK baby and stood behind Charles. Mr. William also secretly took it from his pocket. Countless planing knives were ready to fight at any time, and Mr. Granger did not know where to find a Glock. Even Mrs. Granger took out a tactical flashlight and was ready to assist at any time. Seal, who was a little nervous at first, thought of turning around to warn everyone to be safe. After taking it, he turned around and saw this battle, which made Seal almost call out a good guy. Shah, who took a lot of energy to hold back his exclamation, looked at his relatives and friends with some surprise. A kind of, I don't know why, but I always feel that the style of painting around me is really not in line with the world of HP. It feels spontaneous. Before Seal could return to his senses, the door was suddenly opened. This sudden attack shocked Seal and of course Newt, who opened the door. Chapter 125 _ Some complicated state of affairs. At this time, Mr. Newt felt extremely wronged. He had committed autism many years ago. He sat on the sofa in a grieved way and kept rubbing his eyes. Seal stood aside and pressed the aggrieved old man softly. Newt's wife, Tina, was sitting across from her, laughing so hard that she could barely stand up, while the others sat embarrassedly holding the tea that Tina gave everyone, trying to ease the embarrassment. Let's rewind the time to 15 minutes ago and see what happened. Mr. Newt had just opened the door, and this sudden attack not only frightened Seal, who was still on the door, but also completely frightened the group of relatives and friends behind Seal who were not so harmonious. Mrs. Granger, who hadn't reacted yet, turned on the flashlight's flash mode with her hands faster than her brain, and gave Mr. Newt a blinding shot, and then Hermione reacted faster, and immediately cast a spell on him. Mr. Newt put on a layer of armor. Hermione is also in a hurry, and even completed a perfect silence spell casting in her desperation. Just as Hermione finished casting the spell, Mr. William's scalpel flew to Mr. Newt's body with lightning speed. If it weren't for Hermione's magic, maybe the aggrieved old man who was sitting on the sofa at this time would already be lying in the hospital. Of course, Seal, who had reacted, immediately stopped everyone's movements. To be honest, if it wasn't for Ciel's quick voice, there might be a regular burst of noise from Mama Ciel's ack baby. After the misunderstanding was resolved, the matter became clear. Tina, who heard the voice, also rushed out. After understanding the whole story, everyone helped the only injured Mr. Newt on the sofa, and then Mr. Newt's wife. The ruthless ridicule of Newt began. When the time was set back to the present, Mrs. Tina laughed for a long time before she stopped laughing and comforted everyone. It's okay. Newt has this temper. He has his favorite animal, and he doesn't like to talk at all other times. I've told him many times, I hope this time I can have a long memory. Hearing his wife's words, Newt felt more and more depressed, and even felt that his trip to Paris was wrong. After changing for a long time, Newt felt that he was much better, so he put down his hand rubbing his eyes, looked at it carefully, and kept comforting himself Seal by his side. He didn't speak, just looked at Seal so straight, making Seal a little embarrassed. Although Newt was already an old man at this time, he still had the shadow of the prosperous beauty of the little freckles back then, but it was like that. Looking at Charles, he felt a little nervous. Mr. Newt. Well, I'm really sorry, are you feeling better? In the end, Seal couldn't stand the decision to break the embarrassment. Hearing what Seal said, Mr. Newt nodded his head slightly, and replied somewhat restrainedly, it's okay, it's just, you are actually doing the right thing. The unknown requires a vigilant heart at all times. Quote. Newt really didn't know what to say, so he could only answer Seal like this. After he finished speaking, he stood up and walked upstairs, saying, wait a minute, I have Dumbledore here. You'd better read the letter from both of us. Hearing this, Seal regained his energy and answered aloud yes, and sat on the sofa waiting quietly, thinking that he should continue to have a good relationship with Mr. Newt in this situation. After all, except for what Dumbledore said, my pet, I still want Mr. Newt's memory. On the other hand, the whole family at this time was already familiar with Tina, and there was no embarrassment at all, and the women soon began to discuss some women's topics in depth. Even the two big men began to look at the magic items in the room after getting Tina's consent. Facing the constantly moving photos, Mr. Granger was even more confused with an unknown portrait in the room. Chatted up. After a while, Mr. Newt came back, and after handing Charles a letter, he sat on the side, wondering what he was thinking. Charles glanced at Newt, who didn't know what to say, and decided to look at Deng first. Brydore's letter. Charles, who was looking at the letter, looked worse and worse the more he looked at it, and even couldn't help exclaiming. When Charles was assured of the letter, his face was already gloomy and terrifying. and he looked at Mr. Newt. So, I haven't arrived yet. What about Paris, where pets were robbed and on the mafia's kill list? Mr. Newt nodded, and before Mr. Newt could speak, Mrs. William exclaimed, stepped forward and snatched the letter from Charles's hand, and began to see Mrs. William, a policeman, against the Black Hand. Terms like party are particularly sensitive. When Mrs. William put down the letter in her hand, her face was already dark enough to catch up with the bottom of the pot, and her body exuded a murderous aura that no strangers should approach. Compared with Mrs. William, Charles is a younger brother. After everyone read a circle of letters, the happy mood of the Paris vacation was gone, and they all began to feel a little lower. After all, it is not so good for anyone to be targeted by a group of lawless people. Charles is better, after all. He can still have some magic, but as ordinary adults, the holiday mood has disappeared at this time. Just when everyone didn't know what to say, Mr. Newt spoke first. This matter is a bit more complicated. I secretly went to the pier to see it. According to the traces, there should be not only those bad muggles, but also some people who hide it. I don't know why those bad muggles are targeting you. As soon as Mr. Newt's voice fell, Mrs. William took it. I know why, because we just destroyed one of their dens not long ago, causing them to lose a lot, and my big treasure is one of the spoils. It was only temporarily borrowed by me. Quote. Hearing his mother's words, Shatter really felt a black line, and couldn't help but complain, Mom, you still dare to travel like this, or is it your hometown? Hearing CL's complaints, before Mrs. William could speak, Mrs. Granger took the lead in laughing, Little Seal, don't underestimate us. After he finished speaking, he gave everyone a smile that you all know, which made Charles confused. Before Charles could speak, Mr. Newt's wife, Tina, spoke, it should be more than that, dang. Brydor also said that there should be some pure-blooded families in it. In short, things should be a bit complicated. Hearing this, Seal was even more irritable, and couldn't bear to curse, those damn pure-blooded idiots. Chapter 126-Shall and Hermione. Seal was sitting on the sofa in a bit of annoyance. Anyone who had a wonderful holiday was disturbed by some strange things would not be in a good mood. Seeing that Seal looked a little upset, Hermione stepped forward to comfort him in a good mood. Don't worry about Seal, we haven't seen anything, the mysterious person and the basilisk have survived, these things are all over the place. It's a trivial matter. What's more, report the real situation to the local police station and the Ministry of Magic, they will not ignore it. Hearing Hermione's words, Ciel's mood improved a lot, but before Ciel was happy, the two adults clearly caught some of the problems in Hermione's words. Wait, what are Mystery and Basilisk? Why didn't you two ever talk about it? Asked Mrs. William and Mrs. Granger in unison. Hearing the questioning of the two mothers, Hermione and Shire were immediately stunned. These adventurers, Shire and Hermione, had never told their family members, and they were afraid that the adults of the two families would be worried. But now Hermione's good intentions have done bad things, and she accidentally revealed it, which can arouse the vigilance of the adults in the family. Hermione looked at Ciel anxiously and helplessly, her eyes clearly telling Ciel, what should I do? Shatter also had numbness on his scalp, sweat on his forehead, and his brain was spinning very fast. He stuttered and replied, well, the mysterious man is a person without a nose, very ugly. Terrified, as for the basilisk, it's just a little poisonous snake, Harry was bitten and it's all right. It's impossible for the two mothers to believe that Shire's apparently fabricated nonsense. Mrs. William, who was thinking faster, immediately looked at Mr. Newt, who was stunned by the sight. The meaning was obvious. Do you know what's going on? Newt doesn't care about mysterious people. Old people who have experienced Grindelwald's period are very fond of Voldemort's set, but Mr. Newt is obviously more interested in the topic of basilisk. Before Newt could speak, the sensitive Mr. Newt immediately noticed Mrs. William's slightly dangerous gaze, and immediately explained to Mrs. William what a mysterious person and a basilisk were. Before I came, I didn't forget to ask what happened to the Shire basilisk. Are you still in school? Of course, neither Shire nor Hermione was in the mood to answer Mr. Newt's question at this time, for the simple reason that no one could ignore the two mothers in anger. After listening to Mr. Newt's explanation, the two mothers stared angrily at the two little ones. The meaning is obvious: if you two die today, you must never think of going out this door. Seeing this situation, Shire and Hermione immediately shivered and explained everything that happened in these 2 semesters. Of course, many details were hidden, such as the relationship between Shire and Dumbledore, plans and the like. The two mothers became more and more alarmed. After the 2 children finished speaking, they started an education for half an hour. Of course, the firepower was mainly concentrated on Seal. After all, in the eyes of the 2 mothers, this kind of good news is not reported. The worrying attitude can only be imagined by someone like Seal. In the end, after Seal kept explaining the situation that he and Hermione were able to deal with and showed a wave, the 2 mothers let go of the 2 little ones. But the request that followed immediately evoked Seal's fear of the new year when he was a child in his previous life. That's right, his parents asked Seal and Hermione to do something out of curiosity. Both of them refused at first, but under the increasingly dangerous gaze of the 2 adults and the expressions of Newt and his wife eating melons, the 2 little ones still bit the bullet and showed everyone a lot of what they had learned. Magic. In the end, Mr. William, who was not satisfied with it, wanted Seal to show the elemental magic of Seal's whole body, but Seal refused on the grounds that Dumbledore would not allow it. Seeing that Seal had moved all his teachers out, the others could only helplessly let go of the 2 little ones. Afterwards, under the warm reception of Mrs. Tina, the adults decided to go to the kitchen to show off their skills and get a table of delicious dishes together. After all, this is a trip, and we can't let a piece of mouse shit spoil everyone's good mood. Seeing that everyone was gone, Mr. Newt came up and asked in a low voice about the basilisk. After all, even in the magic world, the basilisk species is very rare. Seal looked at the old man with the light in his eyes, and at the grown-up who had gone away, and recounted the story of himself and the basilisk Quelliar in a low voice. When Newt found out that the basilisk had passed away, he couldn't help but showed a regretful expression. Throughout the entire magical world, there were very few pictures of the basilisk. If possible, Mr. Newt really wanted to see it with his own eyes. Look like a basilisk. Seeing Mr. Newt's sad look, Charles finally lent Mr. Newt's basilisk's fangs to study. The old man was as happy as a child when he saw the basilisk's poison, and trotted all the way to the building holding the fangs. On the study. Even before dinner was eaten, Tina delivered it to the study herself. Although there were too many surprises today, Charles still had to admit that the quality of the evening was still good. When everyone had finished their dinner and lay on the sofa to digest their food, Mrs. William helped Tina to clean up the dishes. After the chopsticks came. Seeing a few people sitting on the hair rubbing their stomachs, Mrs. William sighed helplessly, and after sitting down, she said with a slightly serious expression, "I don't think we should sit still, right? Since the matter has been found on our heads, I think we should take the initiative and contact the local officials." Quote. As soon as Mrs. Williams' voice fell, Tina came out of the kitchen and took Mrs. Williams' words. "Sorry dear, we contacted the Ministry of Magic before you came, and they are being the released magical creatures are causing an unusual headache. They are searching back and forth all over Paris, and even some have not been found so far." Quote. Mrs. Tina paused for a moment and then continued. Newt asked his brother, "The Ministry of Magic doesn't seem to be able to help you. They're out of luck, not to mention the Muggle thing this time. The Ministry of Magic is currently it's a fight with the Muggle government." Hearing Mrs. Tina's words, Mrs. William gave a mysterious smile. "No, I don't think we need any help from the Ministry of Magic. I think we can get it done, but before that, I need to contact my old friend." After that, not only Mrs. William, but even Mr. and Mrs. Granger leaked mysterious smiles, causing Shire and Hermione to look at these adults inexplicably. Chapter 127-Chaotic Prelude. Just when the two families and the Newt couple were discussing plans, in Paris at this time, the daytime parade crowd had turned into a crazy carnival. A large group of people lit a bonfire in the street, and some even took out beer without knowing where. The parade crowd turned the serious demonstration into a carnival for the participants under the cover of the night, and even many people they all started to use the fire to have a barbecue, and a large group of people began to sing and drink wine. Although the main street is very lively, these still can't stop the development of many unsightly things in some dark alleys, such as now. In a dark alley next to the main road of the carnival, according to the past development, except for those drunken drunks who will crouch in the alley, waiting to be found naked the next day on the ground. But today is obviously different. Although there is still a lot of people at the end, it is obviously too quiet in this dark alley. Those drunken people seem to have collectively ignored this small alley they used to love. Just don't go into the alley. This unusual situation was soon discovered by a few people in the alley dressed in black and wearing a traditional gentleman's hat, and one of them was carrying a black-covered cat cage in his hand. "Big brother, it always feels weird to me here today," a chubby man couldn't help but said to the tall, thin man holding the cage in a suppressed atmosphere. The tall man was actually beating drums in his heart. It was really unusual today, and it was a little too quiet, but the tall man tightened the Glock pistol in his hand, then turned around to look at the younger brother who was watching over him, and then thought of that family. The attractive price offered by his second-in-command, and the appearance of the long spear that faintly leaked out of the younger brother's wide clothes. The end, greed overcame fear, and the tall thin man answered the fat man's question viciously. "Shabal Popov, if you are afraid, you can get out of here now, so I think everyone can get a little more money." As soon as the boss's voice fell, the only woman in the team couldn't help but ask, "Hey Picasso, what the hell is this thing? I have never seen such a beautiful little thing in my nearly 10 years of medical experience." Obviously, this woman was convinced by the small things in the cage. The motherhood of women really made her a little reluctant to give out such beautiful little things for money. After all, snakes don't know how the big guys in the gang will treat this beautiful person in the cage. Little life. Shut up, Acker Abby. It's not something you should worry about. I'm looking for you just in the hope that you can control our money-shaking tree. Watch the time. Don't forget to give this darn don't know who is what a sedative injection. The tall and thin man became more and more irritable. Thinking of the energy and materials he had taken to capture this little guy, he felt a lot of heartache for no reason, and even for the sake of this damn little guy, he forcibly damaged a little brother. If it wasn't for this little guy being rewarded with an uncapped astronomical price, maybe he would definitely be very happy to reward this damn gadget a few peanuts at this time. "We have to speed up, hurry up to deliver the goods, and then take the money and go back in a dashing way. Hurry up, out of the alley, we will arrive at the pub of the Reynolds family." After the tall man finished speaking, he began to urge the 4 or 5 younger brothers around him to speed up, so as to avoid long nightmares. Knowing that the Renault family can offer bounties throughout Paris, there may be some people who are staring at the goods in their hands at this time. Just as they quickened their pace and were about to walk out of the hand of the alley, a terrifying green light shot out from the dark alley behind them. A young disciple who was following behind the tall man was hit by the green light and lay unconscious on the ground. The sudden appearance startled the tall man, and several people turned around immediately, all weapons aiming at the place where the green light shot. "I'm sorry, boys, put down the cage in your hands, maybe I can let you go if I'm in a good mood." A voice full of evil sounded deep in the alley, but it was only a voice heard, no figure can be seen. The tall man was even more flustered in his heart, and he didn't know why there was always a bad premonition in his heart, but looking at the long guns and short cannons around him, these weapons still gave him a great sense of security, even though he didn't. "I don't know what kind of weapon that green light is. Who is pretending to be a ghost? This is our item, why do we have to hand it over?" After speaking, he looked at the guns of the younger brothers around him. He seemed to be sure that his firepower was definitely above the opponent, so the tall man was very confident. He laughed disdainfully. "Brother, no matter how you did it, but I advise you to look at the comparison, don't know what's wrong." Hearing the disdainful words of the tall man, the opposite person seemed to be laughed at by this man's stupidity. After a burst of wild laughter, a figure slowly walked out of the dark corner. This black shadow's face was full of madness, and even looked at the few people who were facing him with weapons with a bit of excitement. Stupid muggles, you really made me reconfirm the stupidity of muggles. Who gave you the confidence to speak to me like this? The man in the blood-red coat looked at the muggles who were playing against him with disdain, and asked in disdain. Who gave me the confidence? Of course I gave it myself. Let this fool who is still wearing a trench coat in the summer see how good we are. Fire! The command. For a time, various IWC firearms rang in the alley like fried beans, and the flames from the muzzle even illuminated the dark alley, but surprisingly, it was on the main road not far away. The carnival crowd was still drinking and eating meat as if they didn't hear the gunshots. Of course, not only the carnival crowd, but also the man standing in the alley wearing a blood-red coat in summer. The man just took out a small wooden stick that was also blood-red and gently swayed it in front of him. The bullets fired by the squad on the opposite side were like building in an invisible bay, losing power and hovering in front of the man. Hee, that's all. When everyone finished shooting the bullets in their hands, they looked at the wall made up of bullets on the opposite side, and everyone's eyes widened. This scene was beyond their understanding. Chapter 128-Chaos Overture 2. The man simply waved the small wooden stick in his hand, and the large bullets in front of him seemed to have lost the power to support and fell to the ground one after another. Looks like you don't have any special tricks anymore. Poor muggles, that's the only way to overturn it. The man in the blood-red coat said disdainfully. Then he pointed the little wooden stick viciously forward, and as soon as he reached the pale light curtain, it rushed forward along the alley, and in an instant, the light curtain passed through the bodies of several muggles. The nervous tall man was still pierced by the light curtain after blocking it with his hands in vain, but it was strange that for a while, the tall man did not feel the slightest discomfort. Ha 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 ha, that's all. The tall man began to touch his body up and down, and after confirming that he had no missing parts, no more parts, and he could not even feel the pain, he was right. He complained to the man opposite. The man in the blood-colored coat didn't care, shrugged his shoulders, and replied easily, that's it. Then he ignored the threats of several people and started to walk forward. After all, his goal was to be protected by several people in the middle. Just a cat cage. Seeing the man ignoring him, the tall man was angry, and after quickly changing the magazine, he was about to shoot the man walking by, but before he could shoot, a woman's scream came from beside him. It was the female veterinarian who covered his mouth and screamed in horror, and pointed at himself and yelled, "Face. Your face." The tall new student was puzzled, and he couldn't help raising his arm holding the cat cage and rubbed his face. It didn't matter, but a warm, sticky liquid came down, and the tall man couldn't help but wonder for a moment. Before he could be puzzled for too long, the scene in front of him made his heart break with fright, and the few people in front of him, including the woman who was still screaming just now, were slowly starting to melt. Yes, it is melting, just like the ice cream cone in summer encounters high temperature, it begins to melt little by little from the outside to the inside. The most terrifying thing is that if a few people didn't see the appearance of their companions, they wouldn't know what happened. This melting process didn't feel any pain at all, and it didn't even feel much changed from normal. In an instant, a huge fear enveloped the tall man's heart. He began to scream continuously, hysterically throwing away the pistol and trying to pick up the melted part of himself from the ground with his hands and restore it to its original shape. Some people even began to constantly pray for the man who was getting closer and closer, begging him to be merciful to save him, but all this was ignored by the man. The man in the blood-colored coat danced gracefully, and walked happily step by step to the tall man who had turned into a pool of blood-red juice, and he could easily get out of the mixed juice that he couldn't tell who was who. Take out the kitten cage covered with black cloth. Then in 3 steps and 2 steps, he stepped over a large pool of juice that wanted to stick to him, turned around with a smile, and looked at the large pool of sticky juice mixed together in front of him. Look, how good it would be for you to put down your things and turn around and run away. In that case, you don't have to become such a mess of people. But I'm still very kind, and it's impossible to recover. Yes, but I can make it easier for you. I know you feel the same as normal people right now, but my kindness can only satisfy one person, so you understand. The man in the blood-red coat couldn't help revealing a wicked expression. He looked at the big pool of red juice on the opposite side and said tragic words in the gentlest tone with a smile. As soon as the man's voice fell, the large group of red juice mixed together stopped for a while, and then began to roll violently, as if several unknown people were constantly rolling and scrambling in the liquid. The man in the blood-red coat looked at everything in front of him, looked very happy, and began to cheer on the side, just like a child who didn't grow up. It's still so bad, Sherman Reddy. Just as the man in the blood-red coat was watching the excitement, a small glass jar flew over from behind him, shattered in the rolling flesh and blood, and then a cloud of green smoke came out. In an instant, all the blood-red juice was covered. The expression of the man in the blood-red coat suddenly froze on his face, and then a voice came from behind him. The man in the blood-red coat who heard the voice turned around in disgust and looked over. Damn it. You can't help but disturb my interest. Behind the man in the blood-red coat stood a man and a woman, both of whom were guarding the exit of the alley with a small wooden stick pointing at the man in the blood-red coat. Sherman Reddy, hurry up and capture it. Paris is not a place for you to be wild. The woman immediately replied. The man in the blood-red coat didn't panic at all, looking at the woman standing beside the man and smiled disdainfully. Ha, why, after chasing me for almost 2 years, you finally learned to find a helper. The man named Jean didn't care about Sherman Reddy's cynicism, shrugged helplessly, and said to Sherman Reddy, the French Ministry of Magic, I am sorry Sherman Reddy, you seem to have already notorious. Sherman Reddy is a little bit cowardly in the current one-on-two situation, holding the cat cage in one hand and pointing at the two with his blood-red wand in the other. Don't think you can beat me with a helper. 2 years and you never really beat me. Did you, Jean? After speaking, without waiting for the two to reply, he raised his hand and waved the wand in his hand, and a large plume of black smoke began to wreak havoc along with the man's movements. Seeing that the man in the blood-red coat started to act, the two people who were guarding the entrance of the alley were no longer ambiguous, and immediately used magic to deal with it. For a while, the alley was full of colors, accompanied by the roar of men and the curses of women. But none of this seems to affect the people who are partying all night on the main street. Everyone ignores the alley that is fighting fiercely. I don't know when, it was just groups of people drinking wine and eating barbecue. It began to gather more and more, and even began to form another wave of carnival parades. Who had passed out in his hand? It was the arrogant Sherman Reddy just now. The other woman was carrying the cat cage that Sherman Reddy had just carried in her hand. The two of them stood outside the alley and were sighing. These muggles never seemed to know what was going on here, except behind them. The few muggles who were now twisted together like conjoined twins. Chapter 129-Chaos Overture 3. The embarrassed tall man finally couldn't help but look at the equally embarrassed woman beside him and said, Miranda, I. Before the man could finish speaking, Miranda shook her head and interrupted Jean's words. It's okay, Jean, go to the Ministry of Magic to return to life. After all, this is a 2-year goal, I can wait for you. The man was still a little hesitant. In fact, the original idea was to transform himself and the woman back to the Ministry of Magic headquarters to report their work. After all, both of them had just completed their tasks. But it seems that the woman doesn't want to go back to the headquarters directly to deliver the task. After all, strictly speaking, the magic level of women is not as powerful as that of men, and the magic reserve is not as good as that of men who have been battle-hardened. So after the woman politely rejected the man's innocence request, she decided to bring a cage to join the carnival crowd and go to the nearest wizard shop. In this way, she could also use the flow network to quickly return to the Ministry of Magic. After hearing the woman's words, the man hesitated for a while and finally agreed to the woman's request. After repeatedly reminding him to pay attention to safety, the man disappeared into the alley behind the woman with Sherman Reddy, who had passed out. At this time, the alley was empty, and the woman looked at the group of twisted creatures that could no longer be called human beings behind her with some pity, and their ears were full of their constant wailing. In the end, the woman still couldn't bear to let them suffer so much. She turned her head and raised her hand to shoot a green light, and then used a black fierce fire to burn the scene clean. Looking at the twisted flesh that had disappeared, the woman drew a cross on her chest. "May Joan of Arc forgive me, and may you both ascend to heaven. Unfortunately, this magic does not have any cure. It has always only been able to restore into unknown chunks of meat." After all, the woman glanced at the dark alley, and it seemed that she didn't want to stay here any longer. She took out her wand and waved it in the air. For a moment, the alley that was quiet and even a little isolated from the world seemed to be connected. The smell of fireworks on the main road suddenly became not so dark and terrifying. People on the main street also discovered the alley, but unfortunately no one paid too much attention to this small alley where countless things happened just now, and the people on the main street were still immersed in the sea of joy. The woman took a breath, carried the cat cage covered with black cloth, and turned to join the carnival crowd. The petite woman was struggling in the crowd, but she still walked forward firmly. To be honest, if the battle just now was too tiring, the woman at this time would not want to be crowded in such a crowd. When the woman was walking to the side with difficulty in the crowd, a big hand suddenly clapped on the woman's shoulder, which shocked the woman all of a sudden. I wanted to turn around and take out the wand, but the crowd was too crowded, and it was not easy to do this. Before the woman turned around, a voice sounded in the woman's ear. "Excuse me, I want to ask, is this the road to the Eiffel Tower? Well, or should I say, how should the Eiffel Tower go?" A young Asian man, speaking not very proficient in French, held up a small book and asked the woman aloud. The loud voice tried to overwhelm the cheers and laughter of the crowd. But obviously the man failed, but even though the woman didn't understand what the man asked, she saw the map in the man's small book and the dress that was obviously not European and instantly understood that this man was probably in a foreign country. "I got lost while traveling and wanted to ask for directions." Thinking that the woman here has completely put down her guard, and just wanted to step forward and get closer to hear what the man in need is asking, she felt a sharp pain in her waist and back of her head. When the woman lost consciousness at the last moment, she saw the incomparably cold eyes of the man who was harmless to humans and animals just now. The man who asked the way just now took the woman who fell in his arms and glanced at his companion behind the woman. At this time, the man's companion had already got the box in the woman's hand, and put it away in an instant. Knife, and then indiscernibly nodded at the man holding the woman, then disappeared into the parade with the box. After the man holding the woman separated from his companions, his icy eyes suddenly became amiable again. He supported the woman and constantly apologized to the people around him, saying that his friend drank too much and needed to rest. He rushed out of the parade with a comatose woman from left to right, and found a chair on the side of the road, and the man threw the comatose woman onto the chair at once. After clapping his hands, he turned around and wanted to leave, but he thought for a second, turned around and came back, took out a small medicine bottle from his pocket, put a few drops on the wound on the woman's waist, and then nodded with satisfaction. Then he turned around ruthlessly and mixed into the crowd again, as if nothing had happened that night, and there was just a woman named Miranda lying on the streets of Paris and slept all night. Of course, Seal didn't know much about all these civil affairs and secret battles. At this time, Seal was holding his head on Newt's sofa, thinking about who he had offended and how he could overcome this situation. Shire's mother and father were on the phone at home. The two were on the phone alone in the RV, and the other was on the phone at Newt's house. They were constantly contacting someone. After a while, the two of them gathered together confidently and whispered for a while, and then announced in a big way that there was nothing major, and Seal didn't need to worry about anything at all, just wait for them to solve it with peace of mind. Seal looked at his parents who seemed to be unreliable, and didn't know what to say. Just as Mrs. William looked at the speechless Ciel's eyes becoming more and more dangerous. When Newt appeared, Seal hurriedly dragged Hermione away, who was still confused, and quickly walked away from Mrs. William's attention by visiting Mr. Newt's magical animals. Of course, although Shire was just a reason, Mr. Newt believed it. As a fan of magical animals and learning by himself, Newt was really happy to take Shire and Hermione to visit his own portable zoo. At first, Seal just wanted to find a reason to think about what to do next, but seeing Mr. Newt and Hermione so happy, Seal couldn't bear to interrupt for a while, but looking at Charles, he found that some of Newt's magical animals were very interesting, so Charles gradually immersed himself in Mr. Newt's extracurricular teaching. As for the messy things, let's talk about it later. Chapter 130 You Can Always Trust Akka Baby. Early the next morning, Seal and Hermione were listless and black-eyed, and gave the 4 adults 4 crystals. This thing was made by Seal, who couldn't sleep last night and rummaged through the memories Slytherin had left for him. Toy. In fact, the effect is very simple. As long as the crystal shatters, Seal and Hermione will immediately be teleported to the side of the shattered crystal. Last night, the 2 of them couldn't fall asleep after visiting Mr. Newt's zoo under the pretext of visiting. The 2 little ones thought surprisingly the same thing. They can come to me if they have any problems, but not my family. The 2 worried little ones lost sleep for a long time, but in the end, Seal found a way that was not a solution. The 2 got up in the middle of the night and secretly worked in Seal's small box for one night. It was not until the morning that they missed Newt with a yawn in his eyes. He climbed out of it. At the breakfast table, Newt looked at the letter from the Ministry of Magic, his brows furrowed, and Charles leaned up to take a look curiously. Seeing the cautious appearance, Newt couldn't help but feel a burst of laughter, and generously the letter was handed to Seal and to Hermione, who was also curious about dying beside Seal. Then he sorted out his thoughts, looked at the parents of the 2 little ones, and said with some familiar eyes, "Everyone, things are starting to get a little complicated. It seems that we have to deal with not only the Muggles who know magic, but also Other the Sorcerer." Hearing Newt's words, Mrs. Williams' brows were wrinkled, and she seemed to feel that things were a little complicated, and she sighed in confusion, "Damn, who can tell me why those criminals are targeting them? Magic." Hearing Mrs. Williams' words, Mrs. Tina added a bacon omelette to Mrs. William with a smile, and then responded with a smile, "Honey, you must know that those people will never be able to control their greed." After speaking, he didn't care about the people who were stunned at the dining table, just left a deep back view for everyone, and then returned to the kitchen with the pot. Newt didn't care about Tina's behavior at all. He coughed lightly to attract the attention of everyone at the table, and continued with an unnatural expression, "I may go to the French Ministry of Magic in the afternoon." During the pursuit, a ministry Auror was attacked after completing his mission. After finishing speaking, he glanced at the 2 little ones who had put down the letter and were constantly fighting with their eyelids, and asked, "Charles, do you want to go together? What happened last night should have something to do with the pet I want to give you." When Charles heard this, he tried his best to open his eyelids to hug, and said helplessly, "Mr. Newt, can you tell me what kind of pet it is?" Cryptic. Hearing Ciel's words, both Hermione and the 2 parents looked at Newt curiously. After all, strictly speaking, everyone wanted to know about magical creatures comparable to Dumbledore's phoenix. Seeing everyone staring at him, Mr. Newt's social phobia was about to commit for a while, and he could only answer falteringly, "Okay, don't look at me like that, it's nothing, it's just a little pigeon. Very cute, is only a juvenile now." Hearing Newt's answer, Ciel's eyes instantly lit up. You must know that Ciel has always identified with that eastern country in his 2 lifetimes. Even now, Ciel feels that he should belong to that country. As it should be, Shire naturally likes this auspicious beast described in the classic of Mountains and Seas, and it can be transported with people. It is huge and can carry people. Most importantly, it is a cat styling. All this is simply on the cute point of Shire. Therefore, when he heard that his pet was a Zulu, the corners of Ciel's mouth were about to split to the back of his head, but Hermione was a little bit lacking in interest, and muttered softly, "Okay, I thought it would be a what about a panda." Although the voice was low, both Ciel and Newt turned their heads to look at the girl. What Ciel thought was, "Boy, you probably don't know how precious pandas are." Newt can bring them out if he wants to die, so the plan is to chase them to death. Rhythm. Newt was a little surprised. What he couldn't understand was that the iron-eating beasts were a bunch of foolish people who relied on charm and magic to eat and drink every day. Why did the girls seem to like it so much? The two of them shook their heads in tacit understanding, throwing all the strange thoughts out of their heads, and then Charles looked at Newt and said, "Then Mr. Newt, see you in the afternoon, Hermione and I are going to rest. Come on, I'm really sleepy." After speaking, he dragged Hermione, who kept nodding, upstairs to catch up on sleep. Seal swore that he would never stay up late again in this life. Now Seal felt that he was about to fall asleep while standing. Seeing that the two children were going upstairs, the adults of the two families looked at each other before standing up, and Mrs. Williams said to Mr. Newt, "Mr. Newt, I think we need to go to the city. Yesterday I contacted a few friends in the evening, and we have to prepare well, so we can't let the children worry about it alone." Mrs. Williams' voice had just finished, and before Newt could speak, Mr. Granger continued, "The two children will be free from your care for a while, and we need to deal with the Muggle troubles, as troublesome as these things are." Quote. Hearing Mr. Granger's words, Newt couldn't say anything to persuade him. He just turned around silently, went back to the study and took a handful of potions, all of which were used to treat trauma, and gave 4 small vials of fulling potion to the 4 of them. After talking about the effects of all the potions, Newt watched the 4 of them pack up the elixirs with a look of doubt about life, and couldn't help but say, "Bring the crystals, anyway, this is the hearts of the children, and, don't underestimate your children too much. To be honest, the average adult wizard can't necessarily beat 2 people." Quote. Hearing Mr. Newt's words, all the 4 parents showed proud expressions on their faces, and Mr. William and Mr. Granger even more happily shouted that "It is my child." Finally, after Mrs. William left an explanatory letter, the 4 left Newt's country house in the motorhome. When Charles and Hermione woke up in the afternoon, they ate lunch and read the letter left by Mrs. William. Charles was fine, and was looking forward to the trip to the French Ministry of Magic. After all, the movie was still gorgeous. But Hermione's expression was still full of worry. After all, her parents had no magic, just an ordinary dentist. Seeing Hermione's worried look, Seal sighed helplessly and comforted Hermione. "Hermione, don't worry, it's a bit strange, but I think our parents are not ordinary people, and even if they are ordinary people, you can also believe in my mother's strength, and even if you don't believe in my mother's strength, you can always believe in the strength of baby Akka." After speaking, Seal started to eat honestly, ignoring Hermione's expression that "you were not quite right." Chapter 131-Chaos at the French Ministry of Magic. Although Ciel's words were meant to be a joke, Hermione couldn't help letting go of her worries when she thought of what happened to Mr. Newt. After all, at the door that day, the performance of the 4 adults was obviously comparable to Jongsan. Seeing that Hermione wasn't so worried, there was a smile on the corner of Ciel's mouth. One thing to say, Ciel really felt that they were just a bunch of Muggle gangsters. When he was a child at the police station, he watched his mother bring it back with his own eyes. Gang after gang. The only thing that is more disturbing is that this time the gangster may also be connected to some magical forces. Although I don't know the reason, Ciel is not very worried, because in Dumbledore's letter, it has been explained between the lines that old Deng seems to have someone inside. Although he didn't know how his teacher got involved with a group of Muggle gangsters, at this time Ciel could only sigh that Dumbledore's intelligence ability was true, in addition to making up his mind about the gangster godfather Dumbledore. Powerful. Newt was actually more worried, but seeing the 2 little ones gradually let go, Newt also knew that these 2 powerful children didn't seem to need his own guidance. Newt, who was very happy, said to the 2 who were eating, "After you have finished eating and resting, we will leave for the Ministry of Magic at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon." Hearing this, Shar cheered a little, quickly took a few mouthfuls of rice, then threw down the plate, and ran upstairs to his room as soon as he took a cigarette, saying that he was going to prepare. This behavior made Newt a little confused, but he didn't say anything. But after Ciel left, Hermione's face showed a worried look again. Looking at Newt, who still didn't understand what was going on, he asked weakly, "Mr. Newt, may I ask if you have a good relationship with the officials of the Ministry of Magic?" Hearing Hermione's question, Newt was obviously stunned for a moment. He seemed to have thought of something, and answered somewhat uncertainly, "Yes, it's probably okay, although I broke in once." Newt's voice became lower and lower, and in the end it was almost like a mosquito, but Hermione still heard Mr. Newt's words, and slapped her forehead helplessly, and didn't care about eating. She threw down the knife and fork in her hand. Quickly went upstairs to chase after Charles. Newt sat at the dinner table and listened to Hermione's roar upstairs, completely unaware of what was going on. It was not until he arrived at the Ministry of Magic in the afternoon that Newt realized that he was still too young. The intersection of the French Ministry of Magic looks much more advanced than the British Ministry of Magic. At least it looks more artistic than the outdated telephone booth in the United Kingdom. Their entrance is actually a statue that can be understood. It is in the middle of the famous French Magic Street. Walking on this street full of French style, Charles can't help complaining in front of Hermione. Diagon Alley crowded. That's right, the French Magic Street is a real street, just like an ordinary Muggle pedestrian street. The only difference may be that the entrance is hidden, and people without magic can't see the entrance at all. Seal and Hermione walking on the street were like Grandma Lou entering the Grand View Garden, sighing from time to time, and Seal even regretted that his mother didn't leave the camera for him. Newt didn't seem to care. After all, he had been in this street a long time ago, and even some of his little cuties almost ruined the street. Thinking of this, Newt felt a little embarrassed. Involuntarily, they urged the two to come to the entrance. When the carved stone statue moved, they began to ask the three people's names and why they came here. Seal and Hermione gave their names generously, and when it was Newt's turn, Newt whispered his name in embarrassment. When Newt finished speaking, the statue seemed to remember something and exclaimed, which shocked Newt, and quickly showed the letter, explaining that he was invited. After the statue saw the invitation, the three people entered the elevator, but the elevator had just landed on the ground, and Charles was stunned by the sight in front of him. There was no other reason. The French Ministry of Magic was too enthusiastic. There were at least 50 Aurors guarding around the elevator, and a man with a delicate mustache stood beside them. After seeing Newt, regardless of whether Newt was embarrassed or not, he stepped forward and hugged him enthusiastically. Newt. Of course, if the man hadn't seen that the three of them didn't have the box, that was a nightmare for the Ministry of Magic, and after saving Newt, he frantically signaled to the people around him to retreat, and Charles really believed that this man was really enthusiastic. The man gave full play to his shameless qualities, and hugged Newt for a long time, before leading the three of them to the Ministry of Magic. This is the first time for Shire and Hermione to come to the Ministry of Magic. They are full of curiosity about everything here. The man doesn't care, and they enthusiastically introduce everything about the Ministry of Magic to the two little wizards. To Shire met a civet. The originally docile civet cat seemed to go crazy after seeing Seal, and collectively rushed towards Seal. Hermione's body, like a little black panther, caused a burst of exclamation from Hermione. The moment he saw the civet go crazy, Mustache's face turned pale. But he knew who Seal's apprentice was, and if Seal had 3 long and 2 short ones here, it was estimated that who would be able to raise the Ministry of Magic. An angry expression appeared on Newt's face, and the anger on Newt's face froze as soon as he pulled out his wand to protect Seal. I saw a large group of civet cats rushing towards Seal in a frenzy, but it is very strange that none of these civet cats hurt Seal, but rubbed against Seal as they enjoyed it. Some even stick out their tongues to help Seal, licking his hair constantly. Although others are frightened and angry, Seal himself is very happy. How should I put it? The plan is successful, and it is not arrogant that Seal came to take a bath with catnip water before leaving. At this time, Seal was completely immersed in the sea of large civet cats. The left hand licked this, the right hand licked the other, and there was this little cutie in his arms who kept rubbing against Seal. One thing to say, Seal felt that these civet cats did not feel as good as Hermione Meow, similar to hairless cats, but as long as they were cats, Charles said I can do it. Seeing this scene, everyone was relieved, especially the staff who raised these civet cats, who sat on the ground with their chests covered. Ha ha, ha, Mr. Newt, I didn't expect that not only you, but this child is also very popular with civet cats. Mustache looked at all the embarrassment in front of him and wanted to open the topic. Only Newt's mood is not so good. Although he was also attacked by the civet at the beginning, the treatment of people should not be so big, right? Good guy, if you pounce on me, you will bite off my neck, and pounce on this kid just to act like a spoiled child. Newt felt a 10,000-ton hit to his heart. Chapter 132-Elvis Shire. After this small situation, there was a very spectacular scene in the entire French Ministry of Magic. A mustache-led Newt, who had invaded the Ministry of Magic, and two children hanging out in the Ministry of Magic, one of whom followed the entire Ministry of Magic. The civet cat of the Ministry of Magic. The boy was just like Elvis, standing in front of the group of Elvis. The civet cats seemed to be fascinated and followed behind Shire. Just as Seal was having fun while walking and playing with his left hand and his right hand, Hermione quietly came over and asked in a low voice with a little jealousy, "Charles, what the hell are you doing? Did it?" Seal looked at the girl in front of her who clearly wanted to play with a cat, and suddenly remembered that Hermione's pet was also a big-faced cat, and it seemed that the little girl was also a fellow. Of course, Seal didn't skimp on his secret recipe. He quietly took out a small bottle from his pocket, handed it to Hermione, and said in a low voice, "Smear it on your hand, this thing can attract the cat's attention." After Hermione heard Seal's words, she saw that the small bottle in her hand was a treasure, and while no one was paying attention, she secretly gave herself a cat-sucking buff at a corner. This time, it was even more lively. The civet cats felt that they had never felt happy today in their entire lives. First, a very good-smelling boy came, and the massage technique was extremely comfortable. Later, the girl who followed the boy also exuded a good-smelling smell inexplicably. If the civet cats hadn't completely forgotten their responsibilities, it is estimated that according to the operations of Charles and Hermione, the French Ministry of Magic would have completely lost the townhouse mythical beast that has been guarding the Ministry of Magic today. Of course, although Seal liked the feeling of being surrounded by cats, it was obvious that the excitement didn't last long. Soon, a few people got rid of the civet cats and boarded a small secret elevator and continued to the lower level of the Ministry of Magic. After a long time in the elevator stopped in a room that looked very empty. In the dark room, only a table placed around the elevator could be seen. A woman sitting behind the desk is watching a group of people come down from the elevator. After seeing the woman, Mustache simply bowed his head and left in the elevator alone, leaving only Hermione and the somewhat disturbed Mr. Newt at the scene. After the woman saw that the mustache had completely left, she walked out from behind the desk with a smile, stepped forward to shake hands with Newt, and introduced herself. "Hello, my name is Miranda, the Auror of the French Ministry of Magic. I think you are the famous Mr. Newt. I used to hear your deeds often." The woman's words made Newt feel a little embarrassed and uneasy again. Even so, Newt introduced himself and Shire and Hermione behind him. After hearing Mr. Newt's introduction, the woman smiled and greeted the two little guys, then invited the three of them to sit down, and went back behind the desk to do it herself. Newt could speak. The woman continued to answer strongly, "Mr. Newt, you know, just last night, we found the trace of the little guy you reported, and I was the person in charge of that operation. But unfortunately, I was attacked last night, and that little guy is missing again. I'm sorry." Hearing Miranda's words, Newt shook his head and said, "It's not your fault, I'm just curious, why did you call me here?" Miranda smiled, put her hands on the table, and looked at the three people present sincerely. "Mr. Newt, I think the French Ministry of Magic needs your help. You know, the French Ministry of Magic's imported magical animals. The ship was attacked not long ago. Many magical creatures escaped, including your Zulu." Woman paused, then said, "But after our investigation, we found that it was not easy. It was a group of Muggles who attacked our ship, and it seemed that these magical creatures were familiar to Muggles, and there seemed to be several strands in it. Unknown magical forces are involved, and almost all the Aurors of our Ministry of Magic have been dispatched. Quote. The woman looked at Newt helplessly. Even finding your Zulu last night was an accident. In fact, our intention was to arrest people. Speaking of this, the woman seemed a little embarrassed, but she still looked at Newt firmly, speaking of which is very embarrassing. Because of this attack, the number of Aurors in our Ministry of Magic is not enough, so we can't handle some fantastic beasts hurt people, and if this goes on, those poor fantastic beasts may face a situation of being cleaned up. Quote. So the main purpose of inviting you here this time is to invite you to help Paris capture the mysterious animals that have slipped away, just like 50 years ago. After finishing speaking, the woman leaned back on the chair with her arms folded and looked at Newt. Newt seemed to be thinking about something. After looking at Shire and Hermione, who didn't understand what was going on, he sighed slightly. Okay, I can help you catch those poor little cuties, but I have one request. Hearing Newt's agreement, a smile finally appeared on the woman's face. She didn't care about the conditions Newt said, and said with a smile, please say, Mr. Newt, as long as we can do it. Newt no longer hesitated. There is no problem in catching those magical creatures that have slipped away, but the first point, I still have to bring my small box, and the magical creatures I have captured will be returned to their sanctuary. The second point, I need to know the intelligence. Like you said, this attack was premeditated, and many forces were involved. I don't want to hurt anyone, do you understand? After Newt finished speaking, he also glanced at the two children behind him. Of course the woman understood what Newt meant, and the Ministry of Magic couldn't bear to deal with the escaped magical animals. Don't you see those from the Department of Magical Creatures Management? People have been working overtime at the dock for almost a month. Yesterday, the wife of the director of the Department of Magical Creatures pointed the Ministry of Magic's nose at the Ministry of Magic and scolded him for a long time. She bluntly said that the minister stole his husband. No problem, Mr. Newt, we agreed to your request. As for the intelligence sharing you said, trust me, right? The woman said to Newt with a smile. After speaking, the woman stood up gracefully and waved her wand gently towards the darkness behind the desk. Suddenly, the originally black room was instantly brightened. Not far behind the desk, a huge instrument appeared in front of everyone. Then, Mr. Newt, welcome to the Ministry of Magic's Memory Intelligence Division. Chapter 133 _ Isn't it massively multiplayer online VR? At this time, Seal was very surprised. When the lights came on, what appeared in front of Seal was a strange-looking device. It consisted of a device similar to a podium. The place where the microphone was originally placed on the podium has now become about half a meter in diameter. A sphere of white smoke floats inside. The ball is inlaid on the podium, and then 6 long Baroque legs extend from the bottom of the podium. The back of the long legs is linked to a long rod similar to a walking stick. The long rod also has a white smoked glass. The difference is that the glass ball is much smaller and looks about the size of a crystal ball. Behind the podium is a huge column in the Baroque style with engravings. Charles stepped forward curiously and found that the huge column was linked with the podium. In other words, this huge column with the podium and the 6 branches, it is actually one thing. Seal didn't realize what it was. It looked strange, but he was full of momentum, but Newt, who was behind Seal, opened his mouth in surprise. It took a long time for him to react, and he stammered to the proud woman and said, You really did it. The corner of the woman's mouth raised a little, showing even more pride. Yes, in fact, this device was completed last year, but it has been debugged. Today is the first time this machine has worked. Seal looked at the foggy conversation between the two, and couldn't help interrupting the conversation between the two. Excuse the two of you, can someone tell me what this thing is? Newt was still looking at the huge device with a complicated expression, not knowing what to say for a while, but the proud Ministry of Magic official Miranda answered Ciel's question proudly. This is the highest masterpiece that was led by the Ministry of Magic and combined with Mr. LeMay and his disciples for 10 years. We call it a memory search device. Miranda looked at Seal proudly, and the contempt in his eyes that the English countryman specified that he had never seen such a high-end device made Seal a little unhappy. Seal looked at the unconcealed pride in the woman's eyes, as if she had made the machine, and he didn't intend to continue to ask questions. Although he didn't know what the machine was, Seal decided not to let the woman continue. A chance to pretend. After all, Seal is not very familiar with this woman. And considering the name of the department, Seal has a high probability of guessing the role of this machine. In more mature words, this thing is an immersive MMO experience cabin. On the other hand, Hermione was completely immersed in this huge alchemy equipment, unable to extricate herself. As a scholar, she was full of curiosity about the mysterious unknown alchemy runes flashing on the machine. So, Ms. Miranda, what is this for? Hermione continued without looking back. When Miranda heard Hermione's question, she gave one of Hermione's little girls a look that you are more sensible than that stinky boy over there, and continued to answer Hermione's question, even though Hermione didn't look at her the whole time. This device will be used in the trial of prisoners to search for evidence, as well as intelligence sharing. Do you know Pensieve? Hearing something familiar, Hermione's eyes lit up, and she immediately looked back at Miranda, waiting for her to continue to explain. I know, the book said, it is a device for viewing memories. Dumbledore, Shire's teacher, has one. Quote. Miranda nodded happily, feeling that this little girl is very good at doing things. At least she did a good enough job, and then said, this is a degraded version of the Pensieve, but compared to the Pensieve's active memory placement, this device is much more a function to force search memory and memory sharing with multiple people. Quote. Miranda paused, as if thinking of something, and then said, although it has not been officially put into use, I believe that one day, this device will make an outstanding contribution to the Ministry of Magic. The only pity is that Mr. LeMay has passed away. No one can make such a large and exquisite piece of equipment except him. Equipment. Quote. After speaking, he shook his head regretfully, as if regretting that the British Ministry of Magic would never have such high-end equipment in the future. Of course, aside from Hermione, a relatively naive little girl, both Charles and Newt had worried expressions on their faces. Not to mention the magic of memory modification, it was the process of extracting the prisoner's memory and letting him go. Charles frowned. This thing means that future prisoners will have no secrets, and Seal estimates that if he forcibly retrieves his memory, the prisoners in the prison will probably become idiots, not to mention that in the Western world, even in the magical world, the issue of human rights is also put under control. On the bright side. Of course, there are disadvantages, but there are advantages. Seal also admits that for the most sinful people, this machine is a natural judge. The huge plan and chain of interests behind any sinful crime can be uprooted through this machine. It's just that how deep the water is, it depends on what those in power think. Newt also obviously thought of this question. Just as he was about to ask, a serious man's voice came from behind a few people. Okay, Miranda, this device is still closed. If you didn't insist on turning it on, I think the minister will continue to seal this device. As soon as the words fell, the man came to Newt and saw Newt stretch out his hand. Hello, Mr. Newt. I have long admired my name. I am Leonardo Ricci. You can just call me Richie, the current Director of Intelligence at the Ministry of Magic. Hello, Newt Scamander. Newt also shook hands with the man simply, but Miranda on the side didn't seem to have a good impression of the man named Strength. Rich, do you know that you are wasting this great invention like this? Take the criminal who was arrested a while ago. As long as this machine is used, maybe more of that man can be dug up. Sin. Sealing up this equipment is a huge waste of resources, you know. Miranda seemed to be very dissatisfied with Richie's words. After Richie and Newt introduced each other, she said to Richie. When Rich heard Miranda's words, he sighed slightly, patted the still angry Miranda on the shoulder and said, I'll let you see the decree when it's all right. Hey, forget it, let's get started. Miranda, you are the sharer, just stand in the main position, don't forget to switch the mode. Quote. Hearing Richie's words, Miranda snorted, knocked off Richie's hand, and then walked up to the main seat without saying a word and started to operate. Richie didn't care at all. He pointed at his head helplessly to the three of them with Miranda behind his back, made a don't mind expression, and then greeted the three of them to stand in front of the balls, while he himself stood in front of a small ball in the middle. Chapter 134 Seal whose sand value has gone crazy. It wasn't until Charles put his hand on the ball that he realized that Richie's path seemed to be different from his own. The leg linking the main stage was obviously much thicker than the one in front of him, and his meow actually faintly exudes a golden light. Seal couldn't help but pouted. Deep in his heart he couldn't help but speculate with the greatest malice how rich these officials of the Ministry of Magic were. Seal dared to swear that the golden astigmatism was definitely gold, and the most annoying thing was that it actually the dark poke is hidden, but it leaks a little when the corners are decorated. Seal was sighing in his heart that when the French were all sullen, Richie's voice came through. Get ready, relax, Miranda is ready, I'll start the machine soon. After he finished speaking, he started to close his eyes and put his hand on the ball. It seemed that this thing was actually controlled by the mind, and Seal started to feel a little sour. In Seal's opinion, this thing is simply a good thing for watching movies and playing games. The only thing in the wizarding world that can definitely surpass the Muggle world in the future. After all, until the time of Seal's time travel, Seal had never heard of any reports of immersive theaters or game pods. In Seal's opinion, it is impossible to do this fast in the future of the Muggle technology tree. Come out. Just when Charles regretted that Newt was not standing next to him, Richie seemed to remember something, opened his eyes and reminded, oh, by the way, there is a bag on your right hand, don't forget it. Remember. After speaking, he glanced at Seal and Hermione with a sullen expression, as if they were expecting something. Seeing that both Seal and Hermione ignored him, Richie pouted and continued, okay. Now just relax with your hands on the ball in front of you. Quote. Hearing Richie's words, Seal and the other three slowly put their hands on the glass ball with mist inside. As soon as Seal's hand was placed, the mist inside began to tumble violently, and then in an instant, Seal's eyes turned black, followed by a feeling of weightlessness, as if he was doing free fall. In a short while, a beautiful city with bright lights appeared under Charles. To tell the truth, the night scene of Paris overlooking the whole of Paris is still very beautiful, especially the Eiffel Tower not far away. It is simply beautiful under the illumination of the lights. Extremely. The only downside is that Seal is currently in the air several kilometers above Paris, and is in free fall. If Seal is not sure that this is Miranda's memory, and it is the afternoon now, it is estimated that the summoner should have hurriedly pulled out his wand and prepared to save himself. Resisting the thought of wanting to draw out his wand, Seal looked around, and soon Seal found that there were three people around him, Richie and Hermione Newt, all in free fall. And apart from Ricky, the expressions on the other two's faces are not very good looking, but Ricky, who is standing upright at a high altitude with his arms crossed, seems to be no stranger to such a thing. In a short time, several people were getting closer and closer to the ground. At this time, Seal felt that he was starting to panic, and he was in a hurry to get a better landing position. Even Hermione and Newt were doing the same matter. And Seal is still praying not to be smashed into meat sauce. After all, this experience is really too real, and it really makes Seal feel what it is like to skydive without an umbrella. Of course, the last thing that Seal was afraid of fell into meat sauce did not happen. Seal fell to the ground in a frustrated posture, neither felt pain nor caused any damage to the surroundings. Min and Newt didn't do much better either, both of them were on the ground. Only this man, Richie, put on a posture of Iron Man landing very sullenly. He looked very saucy. Seal watched it all the way, and once again complained about a wave of French sullenness in his heart. At this time, Miranda was already standing on the street, just folded her arms and watched Richie in a sassy pose, rolled her eyes and cut it in disdain. Then looking at the three people who were still bewildered, A smile appeared on the corners of his mouth, and he said to the three, "Come with me, this is where we found something wrong." After speaking, he pointed to the dark alley across the street, where another Miranda and a man were ambushing someone. When Seal heard Miranda's words, he quickly patted his clothes and stood up, followed Miranda to stand at the entrance of the alley and looked into the alley, and soon Richie, Hermione, and Newt also followed. Charles frowned as he watched the conversation of the Muggles with guns in the alley. Obviously, this time it was not only the Mafia mentioned by the intelligence, but also many Muggle hunters. "Come in." Until the man in the blood-red trench coat appeared, and the man in the trench coat just appeared, the entire memory picture was immediately suspended. Rich seemed a little surprised and glanced at Miranda. Sherman Reddy was also involved. Rich asked with some uncertainty, but Miranda spread her hands and said to Richie, "No, Sherman Reddy was interrogated by the overnight raid. I want to try my luck and see if I can catch a few animals and go back to the experiment." Quote. And asked, "Who is Sherman Reddy?" Miranda Doken glanced at Seal, who was asking the question, but she didn't want to hide it, and said generously, "An internationally wanted criminal. His greatest hobby is to magically fuse magical animals and human bodies, in an attempt to create the world's top creatures. Muggle wizards he doesn't spare." After listening to Miranda's introduction, Seal felt his goosebumps go to the ground, and he really couldn't imagine what the hell this so-called fusion would look like. Intentioned. Looking at Seal, he said patiently, "Wait a minute and you'll know why Sherman Reddy became a wanted criminal." Without waiting for Richie's objection, she continued to play her memory directly. The process of Sherman Reddy's magical fusion was too cult. And it made Seal feel that his sand value had dropped to zero and even began to wonder if he was in a world of Cthulhu when Miranda in his memory threw the bottle of rejuvenation potion. Looking at the monster in front of them, Seal and Hermione felt that their stomachs began to churn for a moment, and even their spirits were not so good. Richie stopped sharing memories when he saw that the two were so considerate. Shire and Hermione pulled out their right-hand pockets at the same time and began to vomit. Even Newt's face was not so good. Only Richie and Miranda had the same expressions, and they seemed to be used to it. Richie even made a joke to Miranda, "Look at me, let me say that putting the bag is useful." Of course, the only thing that can be harvested is Miranda's super long stare. Chapter 135_Familiar and Unfamiliar Language. Seal and Hermione both vomited for a long time before they recovered. Seal forcibly suppressed the feeling that he wanted to vomit, and said to the two people who were still bickering, "I swear, if there is such an anti-human being in the back, even let it be. People feel that the value of sand is going crazy, then I refuse to continue to help." Quote. After Charles finished speaking, even Newt agreed with a pale face. Although he has experienced many wars in his life, and even seen the cruelty of many magical animal smugglers, compared to Sherman Reddy, the knowledge is as pure as that of a child. Seeing the appearance of several people, Miranda shook his head helplessly, and then said, "No, the back is normal. This machine can't extract as accurately as the pensieve, so it can only extract memory by means of memory nodes. Unfortunately, that picture is my memory node." Quote. Miranda reluctantly said to everyone, "That picture Miranda herself is very unforgettable, otherwise it will not become the existence of a memory node." After the three of them got Miranda's protection, they continued with a pale face. The second free fall, it was obvious that Seal had experience. Looking at Richie, who was a saucy bag, Seal did not politely pose. Black Widow's exclusive landing pose. The echoing gestures of the two attracted Richie's admiring gaze, Miranda's disgusting gaze, and Hermione's helpless gaze. Of course, the two of them didn't care, especially Ricky, who stood up very cheeky and immediately stepped forward and patted Charles on the shoulder and said that the young man is very savvy, and I will try it next time. Miranda's memory. At this time, Miranda and Jean were fighting Sherman Reddy in the alley. In terms of things, the special effects of this one-on-two battle are still very gorgeous. The colorful spells were continuously launched on the wands of the three of them. Of course, the ending was still the same as before. Let Sherman Reddy be taken away. Miranda ended the existence that made the sand value 0 out of kindness. Pain. This made Shirgo look at Miranda like Miranda, and Richie didn't say anything. Even though those few people survived, they couldn't be cured in the Muggle hospital, even if it was estimated in the magic hospital all are difficult levels. It's better to understand their pain than to let their pain exist, not to mention this is what these people want. The moment Miranda stepped out of the alley, the scene paused again. Miranda stepped forward and looked at a few people seriously. The next thing is the crux of the matter. A few people stole my cage. At that time, I was in a hurry and didn't know if the cage was really your lost magical animal. So please let me know immediately if you find anything. Quote. After speaking, several people nodded solemnly, and Seal also knew that the next thing was dry goods. Soon the scene came to the place where Miranda found the attack, and Seal meticulously watched the slow-playing scene for fear of missing a single detail. But soon Seal was speechless in shock, because it was obvious that Miranda was attacked by two people with oriental faces, and most importantly, the attack on Miranda was not a knife at all, but only wrapped in golden hands. Seeing this picture, everyone's faces turned gloomy. Except for Seal, it was obvious that these people were not using the traditional magic system, which meant that another force had appeared to be involved in this matter. In addition, Newt, who has a thorough research on magical animals, quickly judged that the cage was not filled with Zowu, but a black cloth with the corner of the cage that Miranda let go when he was attacked. A fire fox, or a red fox. This kind of fox looks like a kitten when it is a child, so it is often adopted and fed by ignorant Muggle humans. It will gradually take on the appearance of a fox candy until it grows a little bit. At this time, the red flaming fox they generally leave the human home in which they are raised. Occasionally, they will encounter the situation of killing their own breeders. Of course, this situation is usually caused by humans who treat the crimson fox badly when they are young. Afterwards, several people continued to look at Miranda's memory. When Miranda fell into the arms of the Oriental man, Seal was very keen to notice the flashing green light of the man's hand on Miranda's wound. And the helplessness in the eyes of the man who stabbed Miranda. Several people were extremely quiet at this time, and no one spoke, even Miranda, who witnessed the incident. She herself never expected such an outcome. The scene after that is short and continuous, until Miranda is thrown on a park bench, and the man leaves and returns to apply some medicine to Miranda's wound. When he turned to leave, Seal really heard a Cantonese sentence, "Life and death are destiny, wealth is in heaven, I'm sorry for the foreign lady." Seal was so shocked that he didn't know what to say, and he never thought that he was actually from the East, and that pure Cantonese Seal would not have heard it wrong. But what makes Shire puzzled is why people from his home country in his previous life want to travel all the way to Europe to hurt Miranda. Is it really just for that firefox? Or for that little Zowu? Charles wasn't sure. But Miranda didn't care what Seal thought. It was obvious that Miranda successfully learned more details by replaying the memory this time, and Miranda immediately stopped the memory sharing in a rage. Miranda, who had just exited, lifted her legs and walked out, chanting the sentence that life and death are fate, wealth and honor. As she walked, for fear that she would forget, she vowed to determine who these people who dared to attack him were. Seeing Miranda who left in a rage, Rich laughed helplessly, and reluctantly apologized to the three people who were still standing beside Seal, and then left the room with the three of Seal. And Rich took over Miranda's task when he parted with Newt, and after confirming with Newt the details of catching the escaped magical animals, he sent the three of them out of the Ministry of Magic in person. On the way back, the three of them all had their brows furrowed, and they didn't feel as if they had just come to the Ministry of Magic to take a look around, especially Charles, who heard the familiar and unfamiliar language of Charles. Time is full of thoughts. What's more, Seal seems to have discovered the details that are not explained in the entire Harry Potter and even the Fantastic Beasts. That is, the power system of his hometown seems to be completely irrelevant to magic. Chapter 136 _ A Dull Night in Paris. In the early hours of the morning in Paris, the night was thick, and there were no crowds during the day or even in the evening. The whole street was so lonely as if you could hear your own heartbeat. An ordinary sign car was parked downstairs in an apartment in the downtown area. A man was sitting in the car smoking a cigarette. The cigarette butt flickered on the man's tired face. The man's name is Rachel Pate. At this time, he is sitting in the car thinking about his future. Speaking of which, it is also a bit magical. In the beginning, Rachel Pate was just in an old working-class tavern in Paris, madly scolding her immediate boss, and the second in command of the Reynolds family, who had just planned the harbor attack a few days ago. As for the very simple reason, as the lowest task, Rachel Pate felt indignant that she was born and died for the family, but did not get much reward. Of course, he was still a bit rational at that time, and he didn't reveal anything about his family. Everyone thought he was just a poor man who was squeezed by the boss. But as he drank more and more, Rachel Pate gradually lost herself and began to scold loudly in the tavern, and even came to the head, standing on a stool to give an impromptu speech. It must be that the people around are low-level migrant workers. Everyone is very interested in Rachel Pate's speech. Even because of alcohol, people call for friends, and gradually the people in the tavern are getting more and more together. There are more and more people from various occupations. Rachel Pate obviously has a crazy personality, and many people listened to his complaints at the scene, which made his sense of accomplishment more and more full, and his speech became more exciting. Gradually, more and more people gathered. They went from the pub to the street, and then from the street to the square. Coincidentally, it was noon, when many French people came out to eat. Rachel Pate's speech gradually attracted a large number of people, and people began to be angry, and they began to march around Rachel Pate. As the saying goes, there are many people who eat melons, and more people who love to join in the fun. Coupled with some indescribable reasons, the parade gradually became larger and larger, and even finally developed into a general strike with French characteristics. Originally, this accident will still be resolved according to the previous established routine, that is, compromise, negotiate, and finally promise a little benefit. The leader is giving a little benefit, and this matter can be subsided. What's more, the Muggles and the Ministry of Magic, both sides are so devastated by the attack on the harbor, that they have no time to deal with such small-scale demonstrations and strikes. But the good news is that our old Grindelwald happened to be leading a large group of tired and half-dead passers-by to meet the parade. After both parties were French, and after a full exchange of the process, the two parties unanimously decided to target the municipality of Paris, and then began one of the grand traditional French performances. When Rachel Pate sobered up the next day, she found that she was already the leader of one of the grand traditional French performances. What a shame in her heart. The key is because she drank too much wine and she didn't remember at all. What happened? The frightened Rachel Pate immediately contacted her immediate superior in the family, the dog-headed military sergeant who was sitting in the co-pilot of Grindelwald. The sergeant heard it. Good guy, this is good. If he succeeds, his younger brother can have one. Compile, oneself family can welcome another puppet. Taking 10,000 steps back even if it is unsuccessful, it can stir up the water very much, so it is difficult for the official to trace what his family has done. So the strategist comforted Rachel Pate very politely, and sent a chief of staff to Rachel Pate very intimately. As for Rachel Pate's cry, if he said he couldn't, he was directly ignored by the military advisor. People from the Reynolds family couldn't say that they couldn't, and if they wanted to die, the military advisor wouldn't mind helping to buy a plane ticket to Thailand or something. After all, there is still a lot of business in the family. At this time, Rachel Pate also ended her day's leadership work. She came home in the middle of the night and habitually smoked a cigarette in the car. This habit was only a few days ago. This leader's work is actually better than his own. When the gangster was tired, he had to move cautiously every day under the supervision of the staff. If I can, I definitely don't want to do it again, damn it. I definitely want to quit drinking. Rachel Pate slammed out the cigarette butt in the ashtray, and couldn't help muttering. Just as he was about to open the car door and get out of the car to return to the new home that the family had arranged for him, Rachel Pate felt a sharp pain in her chest, and then she slumped onto her car with no strength. With the sound of crackling, this young leader from the Renault group, who was born out of nowhere, just went on the road of strike for a week, and ended his life hastily. After a while, a large group of men and women, holding various small wooden sticks in their hands, appeared out of thin air around Rachel Pate's car, and a situation of siege was formed all of a sudden. "Damn, there's a victim. Use manifest magic. Don't let this damn invisible mind-eating beast run away." The man who was leading the group immediately issued an order. Afterwards, a large piece of golden smoke covered the entire small square in an instant, and all of a sudden, a thin skin covered bones, fingers slender like knives, and the hideous monster was possessed by the golden smoke, and could no longer maintain his invisibility magic. Fortunately, this monster is agile. Even if it can't be invisible, with its vigorous skills, it can dodge 5 or 6 people's attacks in an instant, and jumping into a dark alley in a flash, a few people see each other. The state immediately followed. As an Auror of the Ministry of Magic, he has been played by this invisible mind-eating beast many times. Everyone is angry, and the team leader has issued a military order after a series of roars from leaders. The culprit must be brought to justice later. Chase. Don't let him run away tonight. Damn it, did those sub-officials have their heads pumped? They are going to import such a dangerous creature. The man roared at his subordinates when he saw the invisible mind-eating beast running away. A group of people rushed into the alley in a hurry. That is, it was midnight, and few people in Paris were still awake. Otherwise the Muggle police would have to call for military support because of the momentum of this group of people. On the roof of the building not far away, 2 people were standing at the eaves, looking coldly at what happened below. "Newbie, these people are really bad. I can hit this little thing with just a few clicks. They actually need so many people to chase after them." The squatting figure complained viciously at the standing man. It was the man who cut Miranda's waist with his hands that night. And the man standing was dressed in a decent suit, looking elegant and gentlemanly, and there was no trace of a Taoist priest at all. The Taoist priest shook his head and said softly, "Old Lee, you are still too serious about killing." Although he was talking about the crouching man, the Taoist's eyes never left Rachel Pate, who had died in the car. If someone who knew lip language came, he might be able to see. Taoist, the mouth is silently reciting the rebirth mantra. Chapter 137_New Doubt. Early the next morning, Seal made a simple meal of milk and cereal in the kitchen and sighed heavily while watching the news of the leader of the parade who was found murdered in his car early in the morning. Paris is getting more and more chaotic. Charles couldn't help but sigh, causing Newt, who was eating the same breakfast with Charles, to look at Charles suspiciously. After the 3 of them returned to Newt's house yesterday afternoon, they all looked sad, which made Mrs. Tina curious, and after repeated questions, Newt told Tina the whole story. After Tina found out what happened, Tina, a senior Auror, immediately felt that things were unusual, thinking that Shire and Hermione's parents actually wanted to test the power of Muggles to solve those gangs involved in magic. Criminal. Tina felt more and more that this matter had a high risk factor. Out of concern, Mrs. Tina decided to find the 4 courageous parents and give them some appropriate help. It was also because Hermione knew that things were not easy. Hermione, who had known all the information about the incident for the first time like Seal, was very nervous, just like Seal in the first year. Out of concern, Hermione decided to follow Mrs. Tina to help her parents. After all, she had been taught by Seal for a whole year, so she should be able to help a little. Mrs. Tina, the Taoist priest, happily agreed, and Charles and Newt could not leave together like Hermione at this time because of the commission of the Ministry of Magic. Strictly speaking, there was a pet that Newt found for Charles in this commotion. Among them, Charles could not escape the blame. So naturally, the 4 were divided into 2 groups according to their gender. At Hermione's urging, Hermione and Mrs. Tina set off without having dinner. As a result, it was difficult for a clever woman to cook without rice, and the 2 meals in a row were made of oatmeal and milk with Newt. After all, at this time, whether it was Newt's refrigerator or Ciel's small box, this was the only thing. Who would have thought that in France, which is the most famous European cuisine, it is necessary to eat the emergency food that you bring? Shire silently wiped the tears from the corner of his mouth while eating. Newt doesn't care what he eats. After all, when he was young, he used to eat and sleep in the open air. Newt didn't mind if he had a bite. Seeing Charles sighing there, Newt couldn't help but feel a little funny. Although he knew that Seal had a kind of wisdom that did not disappoint adults, but looking at Seal's body that was obviously still a child, Newt felt that Seal at this time was extremely weird. Shaking his head to interrupt the rambling thoughts in his head, Newt picked up a stack of some heavy documents beside him, and said to Charles, "Okay, don't sigh. 50 years ago was much more messy than this. The Ministry of Magic is now the list has already been given to me. I took a brief look at it. Our workload is not small, not to mention the Zoo who has not found you for so long. I think it is better for us to act as soon as possible." Despite what Newt said, Shire clearly noticed something different in Newt's words. 50 years ago. Are you talking about the gas stove fire in Grindelwald that nearly burned Paris? What happened after that? Can you tell me? The follow-up plot of Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them 3 than his pets who didn't go to the village or the store. Newt didn't expect that Seal would be interested in these old things, and immediately picked up the plate and walked to the kitchen a little embarrassed. Without answering Seal's question, "Okay, hurry up and eat, we have to go out later. I don't want to be scolded by Tina that I'm not as effective as her, let alone with Fantastic Beasts." Seeing that Newt was obviously avoiding what happened after that, Seal didn't care. There was still time. Take your time, you will always see all the Fantastic Beasts series before graduation, not to mention that if you want to see the effect of the movie, Lao Dang, Newt, and Grindelwald all have a lot of memories, otherwise there will be no fun in movies. Thinking of this, Charles also thinks of the huge memory machine underground in the French Ministry of Magic. It can definitely be transformed into an immersive movie game cabin. The ignorant wizards actually use it to collect information and interrogate prisoners. Hetui, wizards who waste resources. Although Seal was constantly complaining about the lack of imagination of the wizards, on the surface, he still accelerated the speed of eating. One thing to say, this kind of thing that can not only learn the knowledge of magical animals, but also do practical exercises is comparable to the school. The Fantastic Beasts conservation class is much more interesting. Just as Seal was speeding up the fight against the cereal in front of him, a green flame suddenly burst out from the fireplace in Newt's house, and after a while, a capable figure came out of the flame. It was Miranda. "Good morning, Mr. Newt, and little Charles. I found information about those two people. I specifically asked my Muggle official friends to find out. They came to Paris on a Muggle plane, but after they landed just disappeared." After she said it herself, she began to look at Newt's small house in France. After seeing the TV on the table, as well as a series of Muggle supplies such as the refrigerator in the kitchen, Miranda couldn't help but say after a sentence, "I have to say, it's very fusion." Miranda held back for a long time before spitting out a sentence of fusion, with a very strange expression. Who would have thought that the most famous magical zoologist in the wizarding world would have a lot of Muggle technology products in his home? Hearing Miranda's words, Newt walked out of the kitchen with a smile. "Nice to meet you, Miss Miranda, although I don't want to admit it. The Muggle box called TV is indeed much more interesting than our magic newspaper. If you have time, you can also buy one to go back and see." Quote. Seeing that the embarrassed Miranda Shire and Newt didn't answer any more words, Newt smiled and nodded to Miranda and went upstairs to change clothes, and Shire also hurriedly sent the finished bowl to the kitchen, and then went upstairs after making up a round and cleaning it up. In fact, Charles didn't say something to Miranda just now. Many purebloods in the wizarding world became inexplicably despised all Muggles because of some of Voldemort's fallacies decades ago, and I don't know where they got their confidence from. Only Newt was an accident. As a pureblood Hufflepuff, Newt not only walked in the Muggle world when he was young, but also did not have any pureblood discrimination against Muggles. Now Charles is willing to truly believe the reason of this kind old man. After all, Who doesn't love an enhanced version of Cedric? Seal packed up quickly. After a while, he was already dressed and appeared in the living room with his small suitcase in his hand. Amidst Miranda's strange gaze, he sat calmly on the sofa and waited for Newt. After a while, Newt also packed up neatly and appeared in the living room with a suitcase of the same style as Ciel's. Now Miranda's eyes were even more bizarre, but Ciel smiled and didn't care. Seeing Newt appearing in the living room with a suitcase in his hand, his expression somewhat like the freckles from 50 years ago, Charles exclaimed excitedly, "Fear, poor magical creatures, your King Newt. Scamander is back." Chapter 138-Chaotic Paris. Angry crowds abound on the streets of Paris at this time for the simple reason that the spiritual leader of the strike, Rachel Pate, was found murdered in her car this morning. At this time, the police were investigating, but the angry crowd didn't care about that. Some people surrounded the scene, some people surrounded the municipal building, and even the top people directly surrounded the police station. The angry crowd shouted that as long as it was the truth, because the crowd was too large and the emotions were more excited, the police dispatched special police to suppress the chaotic crowd. It was as if a powder keg had been ignited at once, and the angry crowd, at the behest of someone with a heart, instantly decided that this was definitely a big conspiracy. So the vigorous confrontation began like this: whether it was a revolution, a strike or a parade, these three Parisian traditional arts, every Parisian has been engraved with the same proficiency in DNA, even in the current chaos on the streets. It happened from time to time, and both sides also maintained the most basic restraint. The current situation between the two sides is that you throw a stone egg, and I still go back with a tear gas canister. Neither side has taken any extreme actions, but they are just confronting each other. Of course, the machine gun-like trash talk in French is definitely indispensable. When the three of them set foot on the streets of Paris through the Flow network, none of the three of them expected such a situation. Ciel could probably guess that it would eventually evolve into this, but he did not expect it to be so fast. The three of them just walked out of the hidden alley of the Magic Street, and suddenly appeared in the middle of the two waves of confrontation. Fortunately, there was nothing wrong with the costumes of the three, and the wands were all put away. Otherwise, maybe a wave of people from the Ministry of Magic would be added to the two waves to erase their memories one by one. The moment the three of them walked out of the alley, they became the focus of two waves of people. At this time, the three of them did not dare to act rashly, for fear of causing any misunderstanding. The wizard was very strong, but facing a team of well-equipped muggles, the other team was the muggles with the berserk buff. Even if they were strong, the three of them kept beating drums in their hearts. "Why, Miranda, you are French, you should be familiar with this situation." Charles tried his best to stay still, and asked Miranda next to him in a low voice. Miranda was also bewildered at this moment. "How do I know? The Ministry of Magic has no chance to deal with a muggle confrontation. Also, I'm a wizard, and I'm not familiar with this situation." Miranda also tried to keep her body still and answered Ciel's question in a low voice, for fear that the confrontation would turn into a conflict because of their actions. It was Newt who spoke at this time. "Don't talk about it, follow me." We slowly retreat back to the alley. As long as we get back to the alley, we can take another exit. Newt also whispered to the two of them. Hearing Newt's words, the three of them acted in an unusually agreeable manner and began to step back stiffly. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, two waves of people stopped confrontation when the three appeared, and looked at the three neatly. People. It was not until the three of them retreated into the alley and disappeared in front of everyone again that the two waves of people resumed the confrontation just now. In the alley at this time, Ciel couldn't help but patted his chest and sighed. "It scared me to death. Now I know why in ancient times, there was a knight as a profession when wizards participated in the war." Newt didn't care about Ciel's weirdness, and lightly patted Ciel on the head. "Okay, don't make trouble. Go to another exit, there is still a lot of work waiting for us." Charles spread his hands to show that "You are so boring, old man," and then prepared to keep up with Newt's pace. Just when the three had just returned to the magic world, a cat head flew down from the sky and landed on Miranda's shoulder. After Miranda took the envelope in the owl's mouth, the owl fluttered its wings again. Flew away. Ignoring the self-disciplined owl, Miranda immediately opened the envelope to read it, handed it to Newt after a short while, and said, "I think we're going to hurry up. My colleagues found the traces of the poisonous leopard. We need to take over." Quote. Newt also read the letter at this time, handed the letter to Miranda and said, "Let's go, we must speed up." Then the leader took the lead and walked out, but before taking a few steps, Miranda stopped him. "Mr. Newt, if I remember correctly, that exit over there was blocked off by a wall a few years ago, and you're going the wrong way." Hearing Miranda's words, Newt stopped in embarrassment, walked back a little embarrassedly, and said with a reddish face, "It's been a long time, I remembered it wrong, it's this way, this way." Quote. After speaking, the two leading leaders walked forward again, the only difference being that Seal behind him was stunned with laughter, while Miranda looked at the old and young helplessly. Half an hour later, the group finally arrived in front of a remote, abandoned apartment. Seal stared blankly at the apartment in front of him, and an unpleasant feeling came to his mind. Just looking at the appearance, this abandoned apartment looks like the haunted house described in Muggle novels and movies. Man-tube of vines. The apartment is not big, with only 3 floors, but the steps of the apartment are covered with moss, and the thick moss has a large cat's paw print on it, and you can even see the scratches of the paws. Seal swallowed hard and looked at the two with a firm expression. "Do you think this leopard will come out to visit?" Miranda looked at Seal with some amusing after hearing Seal's words. "What? Are you afraid? Haven't you seen ghosts at Hogwarts? As a wizard, are you afraid of ghosts?" Hearing Miranda's words, Seal didn't know how to refute for a while. The ghost seal floating around in Hogwarts was indeed not afraid at all, but the current situation was obviously not a matter of ghosts or not, right? "No, the ghosts are not afraid, but I don't know why this house always feels that there will be countless black magic creatures rushing out to attack us in the next second. In short, it is a very bad feeling." Seal answered Miranda's question helplessly. Hearing Seal's words, Newt couldn't help laughing all of a sudden. "Ha ha ha ha, Seal, your imagination is still good. Although I don't reject the kind of thing called movies made by Muggles, but I advise you'd better look at it less. Ha 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 ha, you are Dumbledore's disciple, you have to feel the magic, not the appearance." Hearing Newt's words, Seal glanced helplessly at the old man, remembering what Dumbledore said when he led Harry to look for the locket on the cliff by the sea, magic must leave traces. So Seal closed his eyes and felt it gently. It was obvious that there was no trace of black magic left in this place, except for a magical trace that was obviously not left by a wizard. Having said that, Seal opened his eyes and looked at the house in front of him. As a person who has experienced the teachings of Shining, Gaia and Sadako, Seal still felt a little shivering at this time. Chapter 139-Charles's, Ah. After Seal had done countless psychological constructions for himself, and determined that Gaia, Sadako, etc. were all fake, Seal took a deep breath, and decided to gather the courage to see the poison sac leopard together. What kind of existence? After all, as a student of Gryffindor House, Seal doesn't want to be ridiculed for his lack of courage. Even if this is not the case, Seal is still very curious about the poison sac leopard. After all, the magical biology class at Hogwarts, there would be no such dangerous creatures, at least not before Hagrid was teaching. Seeing that Seal was ready, Newt didn't break the seal, but began to introduce the characteristics of the poison sac leopard. The poison sac leopard is very poisonous, and its body is agile. They will release poisonous mist to paralyze the prey, and then rely on strong skills to kill prey, so our first step is to prevent this poisonous fog. Quote. This is for Seal. After all, Miranda, as a senior Auror of the Ministry of Magic, has always been the front line in the face of danger, and she will definitely understand the habits of the leopard. Of course, Miranda doesn't mind New Zealand special temporary classes. As a person who uses magic, Miranda is well aware of the value of knowledge. Even if it is the knowledge she already knows, Miranda doesn't mind reviewing it again, not to mention that the people around her are the existences of the internationally recognized magical animals. In case of learning some unknown little knowledge, it is enough for Miranda to use it for life. Seal also quietly listened to Newt's popular science. This kind of on-site teaching opportunity is rare. When he heard Newt say that the first step is to prevent poisonous smog, Seal immediately raised it like a student. "Hand, Mr. Newt, is it the bubble head charm?" Newt didn't mind Seal interrupting himself. On the contrary, he was very happy that Seal could come up with a solution, and happily returned, "Yes, it's the bubble head spell. This spell can effectively isolate many things: poisonous mist, water, and even at a higher level, oxygen can be extracted in an oxygen-deficient environment. But Shire, the bubble head spell alone is not enough, and what kind of spell do you need?" Hearing Newt's question, Seal also touched his chin and thought. The poisonous mist is not only inhaled, but even contacted, so it is very important to prevent contact. Seal remembered the biochemical suits of Muggles. In addition to the inconvenience of movement, it is almost the poisonous fog of Tionki's poison bag leopard. Seal thought for a while in the knowledge base that Slytherin had left for himself, and finally answered a little uncertainly, "Does it add protection?" Seal's answer was that Miranda, who had been silent for a while, looked at Seal again and again. She really didn't expect that this little kid at Hogwarts, who seemed to be only in the second or third year, not only knew the bubble head spell, but also no more unpopular protections. Hearing Seal's answer, Newt laughed even more happily. "That's right, it's protection. You're very smart, Seal, but it should be noted that the focus of release is isolation rather than protection. Okay, let's go in and see this poor little cutie when we're ready. I'll take the lead, Seal, go in the middle, and Miranda will trouble you in the back." After Newt finished speaking, it was as if the two of them had cast two spells in front of them. Miranda naturally followed suit and cast spells. These two spells were learned when she first entered the Ministry of Magic. An Auror can never have too much of this life-saving magic. When Miranda cast a spell on herself, she wanted to turn around and put a set of magic on Seal with the same eye. After all, according to Ciel's age, these two magics are really difficult for a child of Ciel's age, but the next scene caused an infinite impact on Miranda's young mind. Ciel not only completed the release of the two magics perfectly, but a transparent bubble appeared on his head, and the clothes on his body were tightened like a chemical protective suit, and there was even a little magic light flickering faintly, such a perfect state of magic. Miranda didn't even think she was enough to finish it. However, the next Ciel's show made Miranda feel a little suspicious of life. I saw that Ciel started to add various buffs to himself, such as armor protection, permanent protection, etc. The magic that Miranda knew and did not know was cast on him one by Ciel himself. Even Ciel's mouth occasionally pops out a few old English word incantations. All of these spells are protective spells. Miranda is startled by the colorful rays of light in front of her. Not missing something. The dumbfounded Miranda gently tugged at Newt next to him. "Mr. Newt, is the quality of teaching at Hogwarts so high now? You don't have to talk about bubble head spells and protection at this age, even these has the mess of protective magic at Hogwarts started teaching." Newt was also stunned by Ciel's operation. Hearing Miranda's doubts about life, Newt could only twitch the corners of his mouth and replied in a low voice, "No, he is just a special case." Ciel didn't care. Feeling that the atmosphere was not right, Ciel stopped casting spells and raised his head to see two faces with doubts about life. "What's wrong?" "The teacher taught me to always have the greatest awe for the unknown, but my awe is not enough." "Is it?" Charles asked in confusion. "No, that's enough, it's even a bit too much," Newt replied blankly. Miranda also looked at Ciel in a speechless manner. It was the first time in her life that she heard someone talk about fear of death so fresh and refined. After a few people were ready, they carefully entered the apartment according to Newt's arrangement. As soon as he entered, Ciel could clearly feel the dilapidation of the apartment. The ground was covered with dust, with messy cat footprints on the dust, and a faint purple mist was clearly floating in the air. Newt, who was walking in front, stopped and told everyone, Be careful, obviously we are not wrong. The leopard should be resting in this apartment at the moment." Hearing Newt's words, both Miranda and Seal nodded nervously. After all, according to the textbook, the poison sac leopard is a properly super dangerous 4x level dangerous animal. Several people cautiously clinged to the wall and slowly searched every room in the apartment. After all, no one knew that the poison sac leopard would hide in that apartment. Slowly a few people began to walk to the top floor. Once they got to the top floor, the strange purple poisonous mist started to grow stronger. Seeing this, Newt extinguished the fluorescent light on the top of his wand, and said to the two of them carefully, "Turn off the light source, keep the light on. Be vigilant, if there is no accident, the poison sac leopard should be on the top floor." Chapter 140 Slytherin Dad's Guardian. When Seal and Miranda heard Newt's words, they obediently extinguished the fluorescent light on the top of the wand, and followed Newt carefully. After all, the person with the most experience in dealing with magical animals here is the old man at the front. At this time, both Miranda and Newt were a little disheartened, and it was no wonder that the two of them were too shabby after all, and the dust was too thick. It was just that the two of them with the two curses couldn't help but feel a little disheartened. As for Seal, he's still a clean-spirited guy. After all, the messy buffs that Seal stacked up really have all the functions. If you use an analogy, Newt and Miranda simply put on a layer of chemical protective suits, and Seal is wearing armor over the chemical protective suit, plastic over the armor, explosion-proof clothing over the plastic, etc. I don't know how many layers. If you can see the gray, you will be hell. Seal stood in the middle of the team and followed Newt carefully and closely. The further he walked in the long corridor, the greater the concentration of poisonous mist around him. Seal did not dare to be careless. In textbooks, the poison bag leopard is said to be able to fight against 100. After a while, Newt in front motioned everyone to stop. Newt carefully placed the box in his hand on the floor, opened the box and took out a huge piece of bloody flesh and threw it in the nearby on the ground. The meat of the moon idiot is the favorite food of the leopard with a poison sac. The leopard with a poison sac will be attracted by it. I put a special anesthetic I researched in the meat. After the leopard with a poison sac eats it, you can catch it up. After Newt placed the pieces of meat, he slowly retreated to the two of them and said. Before Charles could complain, Miranda frowned and said first, "Mr. Newt, if it's a simple food temptation, I don't think we should. It's too dangerous to be so close to its lair." Hearing Miranda's words, Newt just shook his head and said to the two of them, "No, the poison sac leopard has strong resistance to almost any poison and anesthetic because of its own poison sac. At most, the poison sac leopard can lose its mobility for a while, which is only a little longer than the traditional anesthetic." Quote. After a pause, Newt looked at the surrounding environment. "So we have to catch it immediately before the effect of the drug has passed, so getting close is a must. Well, now we just need to hide and quietly stare at us. Traps are fine." After speaking, Newt led the two of them to carefully move to the corner of a room and began to wait quietly. As time passed by, the three of them felt like they were living for years, and Newt himself was a little strange. Looking at the bait lying on the spot, Newt couldn't help but muttered. "Shouldn't it be? Isn't this poison sac leopard here?" The poison sac leopard is almost unable to resist the temptation of the moon-crazy beast meat. Hearing Newt's muttering, Seal looked amused at Miranda, who was squatting in the corner with Newt. Just when the bored Seal was about to turn around to look at the corner where he was, he vaguely saw something on the rotten wardrobe. Two huge light bulbs looked at themselves. Charles swallowed hard, stared at the two big light bulbs, slowly leaned against the wall step by step, tugged on Newt's clothes, and asked nervously, "Mr. Newt, does the poison sac leopard have big eyes?" Newt heard Seal's question a little strange, but he didn't turn his head. Instead he stared at his trap with all his attention, and answered Seal in a perfunctory manner, "It's okay, it should be about the size of a muggle leopard." Hearing Newt's words, Seal had already scolded the old man countless times in his heart. "Don't you understand such an obvious reminder? Do you have to let me explain it, sir?" The ghost knows if this poison sac leopard can understand people's words. What if they attack me if they say something? Sha-er was a little nervous. From the corner of his eye, he saw that the two strongest combat powers were still staring at the trap. Sha-er felt helpless. Looking at the two big light bulbs on the closet, they still didn't want to move. Can be bold enough to tug on Newt's clothes. Mr. Newt, does the leopard like to wait for its prey to be fascinated by the hunt? Does it have a lion-like scarf around its neck? The difference is that the lion is hair and it is stinger. Hearing Ciel's question again, Newt finally felt that something was wrong. Feeling a trembling in Ciel's tone, Newt immediately thought of the worst possible outcome. Thinking of this, Newt clenched the wand in his hand. Almost at the moment when Ciel's question was over, he immediately burst out with agility that was not suitable for his age. He turned around and fired a spell. As a leopard, the poison sac leopard perfectly inherited the agility attributes of cats. Almost as soon as Newt turned around, he jumped off the cabinet and rushed towards Ciel. Ciel's reaction was also very quick. Between life and death, he raised his hand and instantly fired a weapon to kill you, accurately hitting the poison sac leopard, which was still in midair. Unfortunately, the poison sac leopard was not a wizard, and Ciel fired it out in a panic. The magic spell only repelled the poison bag leopard a little, and finally the poison bag leopard jumped in front of Ciel. Although the idea of the poison sac leopard knocking down Sha-er was shattered, it also fell in front of Sha-er, and Sha-er did not hesitate much. Years of training gave Sha-er a natural conditioned reflex. The moment the poison sac leopard landed, Sha-er did not hesitate. I just flew to the side. No matter what, it's always right to keep a distance. Ciel's idea was correct, and his body's muscle response was also correct, but Ciel forgot that he was not facing a wizard, but a feline with an adult body weight, a feline whose reaction was 9 times that of a human. The sac leopard showed the feline claws at the moment when Ciel flew out and wanted to slap Ciel on the ground, but neither Newt nor Miranda, who had just recovered from the light and Flint, were able to face each other. The char forms an effective rescue. Ciel also knew that he could only hope that the buff on his body could protect his waist from the poisonous leopard's claws. But a miraculous situation happened. Until after Ciel flew to the ground, the pain that Ciel expected did not come. It wasn't Ciel that flew out, but the poison sac leopard who wanted to attack Ciel. Sha-er sat on the ground dumbfounded, seeing a light green light curtain appearing in front of him, a little ignorant, and the poison sac leopard didn't have the anti-shock force to pop out so far. At this time, the 3 people and 1 beast were all a little confused. The original crisis situation was easily and happily blocked by the mysterious green light curtain on Ciel's body. On the other hand, Newt reacted very quickly. While the poison sac leopard was still stunned, Newt raised his hand and shot the poison sac leopard with a few spells. Miranda and Ciel, who quickly reacted, joined the battle. Began the situation of 3 people standing on 1 leopard.